memories from the past, of the time when he was a hero. A hand with a sword rose up. The man stood on the site of the battle that had just ended. The young man called himself a hero and grinned. And it wasn't like he thought he saved the world because that was the smart thing to do. His power wasn't something people could understand because it was given to him by a goddess. She knew she was still badly wounded, but she suddenly stood up, saying she wasn't ready to stop yet, because she didn't understand his true strength. She ran towards him because she wanted to know the answer to her question. Alan stood in complete calm. Akira was already flying at him from above, who was already feeling very heavy, because this was already the 10th fight. The girl asked to leave here because she thought it would be very dangerous. Liz and Beatrice were shocked. They did not understand why she said that. The knight wanted to turn to Akira, because if she hit him with it, even Alan wouldn't be able to stand it. The girl decided to use her powers, namely the Emperor's Thunderstrike. Lightning bolts began to appear from her hand, which began to thunder. She pointed her hand with thundering lightning towards Alan. The girl loudly called upon her gift, namely, brave, magic, thunder rain. Then the girl shouted, continuing the phrase of the spell, piercing heavenly light. There was a strong flash that came from Akira's hands and completely covered even Alan's silhouette. Beatrice and Liz, who were standing, laughed after a short silence. It was Akira's laugh who realized that even that didn't work on him. She even thought he was a monster. Suddenly, the unthinkable happened, because the girl started to fall and eventually she fell. Alan only said that it was rude because even he could get hurt if he received such a direct blow. Akira, who was lying down in sweat, said that it was a blatant lie because normally he would not be able to avoid such an attack. The guy decided to admit that he used some cheats, and this proved how strong Akira was. He extended his hand to help the girl get up, and decided to ask her if she thought she had passed. Akira's eyes widened in surprise, and she looked at the boy, and then at the hand that was extended to her. She laughed and said that if he hadn't passed, she would have had to resign from the hero. Alan was tired of living among these people and decided to leave this world. He wanted to be reborn, to start a new, peaceful life. At that moment, his wish came true. The girl decided to tell him everything and thanked him for his help. Akira ate bread, and Alan thought and realized that they wanted him to help them, and this meant that there was a strong monster here. Akira said that she was kicked out by the village chief when she asked for detailed information. Beatrice was surprised at this moment that she could actually eat at such a time. The girl continued that what she knew was that the creature had been there for quite some time. Akira noticed that it had suddenly become aggressive and thought that someone had invaded its territory. But then she contradicted herself, thinking that it was unlikely because this creature lived on the mountain that Akira showed. Everyone was surprised by the size of the mountain and asked not to say that it was he who was the monster. Akira said that it was probably just what they were imagining because the monster that lived there was a dragon. Alan had an image of a large dragon in his mind, which shocked him a little. Alan asked again about the dragon. Beatrice asked him not to tell her about it, and her words were intercepted by Liz, who continued to say that they were found in such places. Alan thought about the dragon because, unlike monsters, it can communicate, and he realized that this is not what he fought in his past life. He also realized that she was asked to prevent the monsters from attacking. Beatrice said that, basically as far as they could see, there were no anti-monster measures in this area. Alan realized that it turned out that they would be guarding this part because he had a bad feeling. Liz suggested that they start by talking to the villagers. Someone asked them to just leave. It was a man who said he didn't know anything. The same story was repeated with several villagers. Alan asked the girls how it went. Akira replied that it was very bad because it was impossible to get materials. All the shops were closed. And yet, it wasn't even close to what they would call a peaceful life. He thought it was some kind of karma, because for him to be reincarnated into this ducal house was not what he expected. The guy thought that if that was the case, he had a bad feeling. Suddenly, Alan turned to Akira, who looked at him very surprised and began to fix her hair. He didn't understand how it was that she knew about the dragon's existence. Akira remembered the request to choose a child before going to this village. Someone asked about the child. In front of them stood the girl who was called Bad, and even in spite of everything, this child could not say anything. It was obvious that she ran away from where she lived, so if she wanted to talk to the locals in detail, This child could be useful. Liz, as she thought, the dragon was intimidating people. Alan said that was not the case. Beatrice thought that it was the people who started it, or rather the village chief who governs this territory. Akira didn't understand what was wrong with him. Alan said that maybe this village was created by this dragon, but they can't know that. Liz didn't understand who could benefit from this. The guy replied that the soldiers had some doubts about that house, and it also seemed more like they were demanding scales, blood, or things that they could only get from a dragon. Because of this, it is impossible for this house to consolidate its power. Liz again asked not to tell her what he meant by this house. Alan lowered his head in disappointment and said that it seemed so, but it was only a guess. And by the way, they didn't understand what kind of child Akira had picked up, because there was something wrong here, because they couldn't go back to the village. Beatrice told Akira that everything had already been decided, which surprised her greatly. The girl looked menacingly at the boys and said that she was asked to help, namely, to defeat the dragon. Alan smiled smugly, and they decided that in that case, everything was decided. They had to get ready and they were trying to figure out if everything was really okay, but that was enough reason to help someone. Alan smiled and suggested that they finally go and destroy the dragon. Before he knew it, he was labeled a child prodigy. When his abilities were assessed at the age of 5, he was already at level 1, with a 5 in all stats. Suddenly, the boy turned to the girl, trying to find out if she was sure she wanted to go with them. This was directed at Liz, who immediately replied that she simply couldn't stand there and wait. She couldn't, and before she could even finish her sentence, Akira stopped her and told them to start walking. Alan thought it was some kind of revelation. Liz looked sad and said that it wasn't quite like that because she felt something was wrong. She explained that she was going because she wanted to go. She had promised them all that she wouldn't be a burden, so she asked them to take her with them. Alan said he agreed to this, but on one condition. At this, the guy raised his finger up to indicate the importance of his next words. The girl had to fulfill only one condition. She was not to act rashly, and she shouldn't think that he was a burden and she shouldn't have forced herself. Lisa agreed right away, but Akira snorted and Beatrice asked what was wrong. But as it turned out, for some reason the girl thought that Alan could attract people to himself. Beatrice didn't understand how that was possible because in essence, it was similar to that. But he really was quite nice. Akira wondered if they had done anything. Beatrice replied that it was ridiculous to even think about it because there were all sorts of things. Alan turned to the girls, puzzled, and asked them, because he did not understand what had become so noisy. Beatrice laughed and said that with this of yours, that is, they need to hurry. Alan smiled because he saw that Akira had become cheerful. The girl hero said that now they should think about their new strategy. According to their plan, Alan and the others were supposed to come from behind, with the battle being open, and Akira was supposed to climb to the top along the main road. Liz repeated the plan made by Akira in surprise, and she said that something was wrong because the conversation was going in the wrong direction. Liz explained that she didn't mean it that way. Suddenly, someone had an idea. He was thinking that if this was a distraction, it would be better if he did it. And people who got 5 points even in one of their characteristics before reaching adulthood are considered geniuses. From the 4th to the 5th level, they are called prodigies, and the 3rd level is already considered a genius. Beatrice said that it was dangerous to go alone, and Liz thought so too, and there was a slight fear on the girl's face. Akira immediately said that she did not agree, that she refused. The girl sighed, saying that it would just look like they were the ones who cleaned everyone up, and she wasn't even in the fight. Because she was a hero too, so Alan didn't have to do all the cool stuff himself. Akira smiled from ear to ear and extended her fist towards Alan, because she wanted to make sure he agreed. The guy smiled and agreed, adding that they could start preparing. The boys went towards the mountain to defeat the dragon, but there was already a crowd of monsters in front of them. Beatrice, although she expected this, did not want it to actually happen. The girl suggested that it was not only people who wanted to be under the protection of a dragon, but Alan, on the contrary, grabbed his sword and thought that it was just in time, before the battle with the dragon, to fight the monsters. Beatrice stood tense and puzzled. She thought that this would be a good warm-up. Alan looked at her in surprise, because the girl did not look like herself. As it turned out, Akira was already standing next to the dragon, which was huge in size and majestically watched the people who were destroying small monsters. An expression of seriousness and anger was frozen on its face. The dragon tapped his claws as if trying to attract his prey, acting like a spider. He said that he often visits his lair. Akira stood with a frightened face. The dragon was ready to start destroying people. The girl was irritated because, although she expected this, she was not ready for such a quick attack. She thought that something was wrong here. The dragon soared up and was right above the girl. She realized that it was quite powerful. Akira realized that she would not be able to escape, but she would do everything in her power. Everything was fine until he was 10 years old, because during that time his level did not rise, and his brother reached the second level faster than him. And all because she promised this child. The girl talked to herself and said that it was natural for her, and first she would save that child. While in the girl's thoughts a request for help arose. Akira decided to use the hero's magic, namely the Emperor's thunderclap. The girl waved her hand and lightning appeared near her again. The voice in her head asked her, because it was not sure she wanted to use it. The dragon stared at her, which made her look at him in surprise. It turned out that he was addressing her, which he did again, saying that she had involved a child in this. At this, the dragon's eyes flashed, which made Akira's face fall. On the ground lay a lifeless body, which was covered in a red substance. Akira saw this. The dragon wanted to know why she did not destroy the child. He opened his mouth and answered himself that the easiest thing to do is to make him a toy. The girl clenched her fist and said that she understood. Memories of how that same child asked her for help came to her mind. Akira turned towards the dragon and said that she would destroy it. Akira looked at the dragon with a menacing expression. Lightning started flying around her again. The voice in her head kept talking to her. It said that it heard the anger in her heart and thought that she was unhappy with her form. The dragon narrowed his eyes and the voice continued that she had been told a long time ago that this skill was too powerful and not suitable for a hero. So he had advised her that she should better not use it. Akira immediately extended her hand, which already had many lightning bolts in it. She thought about it. It's not like it had nothing to do with this girl. She was immediately interrupted by a voice continuing her thought for her, because this sacrifice was dedicated to him. She replied that she only did it because she asked him to save her. The voice continued because it wanted to know if it was unnatural that he could do whatever he wanted to her. Because of this, he was no longer considered a child prodigy. He was treated as a loser, and his younger brother began to despise him. And what's more, the blessing ceremony, in which a person is given a gift, the child in the girl's head began to cry heart-rendingly. This time, the amount of lightning in Akira's hand was much greater than usual. Because this was already a good enough reason to destroy the dragon, the girl used the hero's magic, namely the black blade of destruction. The dragon was already flying into the air and making a loud roar. Akira clenched her fist and looked angrily at the flying dragon. Because everything happened as she expected, one such blow was not enough to destroy it. Well, the dragon was hanging in the air and still roaring shrilly. Suddenly, he turned his gaze to the girl. He wanted to know if she realized that she was fighting him face to face now. It seemed to him that she thought it was all a game and asked her to take it all seriously. The girl didn't pay much attention to his words, because she was only concerned that her attack didn't cause any damage to the dragon. Because of course she wanted to destroy him, even when she knew there was a huge difference in strength between them. But she hadn't expected such a big difference. Akira realized she had to warn Alan about how dangerous this was. The girl asked him to answer just one question. Not waiting for approval, she continued. She was curious that by using his power against this child, he could destroy her from the very beginning. But she didn't understand why he let her escape that time. There was a deafening laugh. The dragon thought she didn't understand that he was the one who let her escape. The dragon had already landed on the ground and was still looking at Akira. His eyes turned black like the night, and he continued to say that for them who live forever, there was nothing more annoying than this boredom. He wondered what would happen if he let the victim escape. Although it was only a fleeting thought, it had a great effect. Akira's memories flashed back to the moment when that child ran up to her and hugged her. God's gift was there for everyone, no matter who they were. But at this ceremony, he was the only one left with nothing. The priest looked at Alan and said that there was nothing for him. The dragon continued to seek help to defeat him. He could not stop laughing because he thought it was so funny. After all, Heroes appeared only 1,000 years ago, and he did not understand what she, so young, could do to him. He assumed that she thought she could defeat him and told her to know her place. But Akira was not going to give up and said that then this blow from someone like her and challenged him to see if his body could withstand it. At the same time, the girl held a sword in her hand and was ready for a new battle with complete confidence. The dragon realized that this was a holy sword and turned to the hero, saying that she could not only speak because he saw it. Da replied that if he wanted to pray for conversion, he could do it right now. Although, even if he did, she would never forgive him. She called upon the hero's magic, and this time the demonic azure lightning. Akira swung the ball. Lightning immediately appeared near it, enveloping the sword completely. She closed her eyes, and then with full determination and anger, she opened them again using the magic of the heroes. This time, she used the final blow and swung her sword, cutting through the air and trying to destroy the dragon. Finds herself facing an impossible Minotaur, because he was trash. But to her surprise, it could even be seen in her wide-open eyes. The dragon was surprised that this was all, and laughing again, he said that he had accepted her attack. But he did not understand, and decided to find out if this was all she was capable of. At that very moment, the girl's body went straight into the sky. Streams of fire emanated from her, because the speed with which she flew was too high. Blood flowed from her mouth, and the dragon stood silently and watched as the girl flew towards the ground. There was a deafening roar, and huge clouds of dust and pieces of earth rose into the air. Behind such a wall, nothing could be seen except the dragon's tail. Akira lay on the ground making her last sounds. It was he who had become worthless and was finally kicked out of the house like this. Thinking about it again, Alan realized that this world was also a failure. But now he was completely free. After all, he could move to some remote region and live peacefully. The dragon continued to mock her, saying that all she had was fighting spirit. But with such a level of strength, the girl heard him in fragments and could not answer anything because she could not make a single sound. But she heard another phrase from the dragon, that her heroism was just a farce. Then the girl began to worry that she couldn't even move her fingers. And at that moment, the dragon told her to disappear. Akira couldn't believe that this was the end, although she didn't want it at all. Brem, at that moment there was a sound of wings opening. The girl's eyes were still open, and she saw how the wings opened again. But she also saw that the dragon was still looking at her, and at some point the dragon itself began to make sounds of pain. It was Alan, who held the sword in his hand. But the conclusion was the same. The guy appeared, defeating the dragon. He said it was good that he had just seemed to think very highly of himself, and Alan hoped that he had more than just fortitude. The dragon was bleeding and had said some of his last words, and those words were insults to Alan. The boy decided to use the Sword of Power, calling the spell of the end of the world. He used the great blade of demon extermination and struck the dragon with it. Liz sat next to Akira. The dragon did not understand how this was possible. The girl's face clearly conveyed sadness, and she began to pray, while the dragon continued, because he did not understand how it was possible that he could injure his body. Alan said that with his magical vision, he could see that this dragon was level 52, and this was a forbidden level that was only held by the strong in this world. While the difference in power brought only despair, the end of the world could easily eliminate this problem. And to tell the truth, he already had experience fighting a dragon. Alan felt a little awkward when he had to destroy. But thanks to Akira, he was able to learn more about this dragon. That's why he was able to strike at its body, because she put her life on the line to give him time to learn his weakness. Who knew? Maybe it was because Alan was stronger than the dragon. Suddenly, there was a scream. The guy turned around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. There was a rustling sound nearby, and suddenly the guy's eyes sparkled. The highest spell, the Akashic Code, the Eye of Heaven, worked. And since he was always so reckless, the guy gave him advice to use only his body. At the same time, he realized that he could not lose. And all this was in order to understand the stupidity of the dragon's actions. He started hissing and there was obvious irritation and anger on his face. He told him to come and come, if he was not afraid of dragging the rest of the guys into this. Well, Alan knew, and that he was a bad dragon. Well, He didn't expect it to be so bad. At that moment, the guy was called out. It was Beatrice and Lisa, who were sitting near Akira. The knight looked at him first, smiling, and then the lady. Alan looked at them puzzled and upset, because he remembered his childhood, because since he was called a loser, he had never seen anyone look at him like that. It was different from how people looked at him before his reincarnation. It was a warm feeling. The little boy was taken by the hand in support, and it encouraged the already grown man for the decisive battle. Alan took the first step, and the dragon thought that he was going straight ahead. At that very second, he roared loudly. A large ball began to appear from his mouth, while he said that they could all disappear together. The guy grabbed the sword and called for the end of the world. At that very second, a destructive flash appeared and a bright column of light washed into the sky, which began to destroy the dragon. He thought it was impossible. The dragon began to disappear, and finally said that such a thing would destroy him, because that man did not tell him anything about it. Alan began to laugh, and his eyes instantly became drooping. Liz called out to him excitedly. The guy smiled and tried to answer them, but he began to fall, and he, as expected, was very tired. Alan's eyes opened, and Liz was above him, turning to him immediately. Alan lay there emotionless with his eyes open. The girl wanted to make sure he was okay, because even if he saves the world, people still won't learn to look beyond their own thinking, because that was the reason he was reborn later. A voice came out addressing Alan. The rustling came from the girl who was fighting the monster. Her name was Beatrice, and Alan didn't understand why she was in such a place. The guy thought about it and realized that since he still needed to get lunch, there was nothing he could do. He couldn't ignore it. The guy jumped up and wanted to know what happened to the child and if everything was okay with him. And Lisa answered that he was alive and well. In his memories, there was a picture of a child lying on the ground, and he was not sure that the girl told him the truth. Akira looked at the boy and was glad that he woke up. Alan stood surprised, and Lisa stood behind him and smiled. The girl sitting on the ground did not understand why the boy was so surprised, and he replied that he was just glad that they were okay. The girls agreed, but decided to add something. Akira could not believe that she had recovered so quickly, because when she woke up, she realized that everything was okay with her. The girl did not know who helped her with the restoration, but she thanked him very much. Alan thought about the fact that only he could regenerate, and thought that there was someone else. Alan asked Akira because he was curious about what she was planning to do next, and suggested that she would continue her journey. The girl thought about it, and, after a little hesitation, agreed. She decided to take the child with her and continue her wanderings, because she had nowhere else to live in the village anyway. The girl was very surprised that they wanted to take her with them, and she exclaimed joyfully. Turning to the hero, Akira asked Alan in response about his next steps. He replied that he would continue to accompany and protect Liz because he had an agreement with her. The girl asked again and looked at his broken blade with doubt. Alan laughed and awkwardly added that he had just wanted to say this so that she wouldn't worry, because a new sword would soon be prepared for him, and it would be nice to meet Akira again somewhere. She agreed, feeling a little sad. After a short silence, Alan and Akira shook hands, and the guy thanked her for everything he could. The girl smiled and said that there was nothing to thank her for, because she was a lousy hero. The guy said that it wasn't true because they only managed to defeat the dragon because she attacked it first. A memory flashed through his mind of Akira calling him, and the guy, coming out of the memory, continued talking. Beatrice held the shield right on the head of this monster, who was pressing on the shield to her. The girl did not understand what kind of monster it was, because no matter how much she attacked it, the monster continued to recover. He said that besides, the guy bent down and looked down because for this little girl, she was a real hero. The girl was tugging Akira's pant leg, and Akira put her hand on her head. After that, she addressed her. Liz thought that they could return to the village with this little one, and she hoped that it would not be a burden for them to do so. Akira replied that it would not be difficult for her because, after all, no one in the village knew yet that the dragon had been defeated. She just didn't know how they would take it, but she thought the villagers had a right to know. Liz was a little surprised and asked to tell the villagers that everything would be fine now. After all, they had been living such a restless life for a long time. After this conversation, Akira and the little girl went to the village, and the boys went their own way. Suddenly, Liz turned to Alan, so that he turned to Alan in surprise. She wanted to talk about what had happened. As it turned out, she had cured those two, and they should never have known about the priestess. The girl did not understand how to express herself correctly, so she looked at Alan with puzzlement. He turned his head over his shoulder and smiled to reassure the girl. Beatrice thought that it would be a good idea to go to the carts from here, because they still had a long way to go. Alan remembered that they were just about to talk about Liz promising to make him a new sword. The girl confirmed it and said that it was in gratitude for saving her life. And besides, it would be safer this way, Beatrice noted, telling Alan that she was now without a weapon. The guy understood this perfectly well, but they themselves were to blame for this. That's true, but he asked not to worry. Liz said she had a friend who could make a sword that would suit his taste, and she urged them to go with her. Alan turned again, smiling, and saw Liz's shining image. He decided to take advantage of her kindness then. Evening came, and Liz was sleeping on Alan's feet. Suddenly, Beatrice apologized to the guy, so he did not expect it at all. He became interested in why she was apologizing. She assumed that it was some kind of golem because she had never heard of such a beast form. Even if she continued to attack, the result would not change, because such an opponent was beyond her strength. The girl's heart was beating very loudly. She explained that he was tired today, but he still had to look after Mrs. L while she slept. The guy told her not to worry because she was tired too. Beatrice became sad and said that he had been looking after them for a long time and she would like him to at least sleep. He replied that everything was fine because he was still young and therefore could not sleep. Beatrice noticed that he did look quite young compared to her. The guy immediately apologized because he didn't quite mean it that way. And besides, she and Liz were tired, and he wasn't the only one. This calmed Beatrice down a little, but then she continued anyway, because that was not all she wanted to tell him. Because he had given them new clothes and temporary shelter where they could bathe. And all this was thanks to him. She was interested in the fact that his strength was still diminishing from such worries, and it seemed to her that he had much more power than he thought. Suddenly Liz, lying on Alan's stomach, opened her eyes. The guy immediately became happy and wished the girl good morning and also asked for forgiveness, thinking that they had woken her up. The girl looked up at Alan and also wished him good morning, but she did not understand where they were. The girl immediately jumped up and began to apologize because she did not want to, because she just suddenly fell asleep and lay on him. Alan said that there was nothing terrible, and it was not hard for him anyway. Liz hesitated and said that everything was fine, but the guy was tired too, so she wanted him to sleep a little. What surprised the guy very much, he suddenly smiled and started laughing. The girls looked at him in surprise. The guy apologized to them and said that they were so similar to each other and even spoke the same. Liz blushed and still didn't understand what made him laugh so much. It had been about 10 days since they had parted ways with Akira and the baby. Alan thought about it and realized that those 10 days had been fun after all. The boy looked at the moon and smiled. She was running out of strength and Beatrice was about to give up. The monster knocked her shield away and the girl flew up. She thought about how she could lose here and considered it unacceptable. However, the girl continued to fight him. The boys came to the market. They tried to understand what the village was in front of them. Lisova enthusiastically agreed and tried to understand whether it impressed Beatrice. She agreed, but a little sarcastically. He said that he would call it a city, not a village. The girls confirmed, and noted that there was even a guild here, in which case it really was a city. Alan thought about it and couldn't understand how this city had become so developed in such a remote place, because there were plenty of jobs in other cities, and this city was too well designed for simpletons like the locals. Suddenly the guy was addressed. It was Liz, who said that before he got lost in his thoughts, she suggested that he again fulfill her promise first. The guy tried to remember what kind of promise it was. Then he remembered that it was a new sword, the girl confirmed. Beatrice was silent, but then said that he was interested in this place. Because she wasn't surprised, because they call him special. The guy thought she wanted to say that this place belonged to the royal family, but the girl said that it was already a secret. They decided to start with the fact that there are different races in this world, namely elves, dwarves, furries, and most of them live in the territory of the kingdom of Adstera. Magic blacksmiths can work for the royal family. They can live among people, live an ordinary life. But there are also those who find it difficult to live here, and they leave these lands. This was quite a difficult problem. This was the so-called discrimination. It exists everywhere. because it is an unconscious thing. One could be a general worker and independent from everyone, like adventurers, for example. Finds herself that boys came. Alan opened his mouth in surprise and looked somewhere up. He thought that this was the very place, and Liz, with a big shining smile, confirmed it. They finally came to their forge. The monster suddenly started looking in another direction. The girl did not understand where he was looking. At that moment, she looked where the monster was looking and saw Liz, who was kneeling and praying. There were various works hanging everywhere, a row of bowls lined up, some of which would be better than Alan's sword, and yet it was strange that the master had hung them up. Liz noticed the goal was missing. The guy thought that she probably noticed that they crossed or it was just a coincidence. Alan didn't understand it. He wanted to ask Beatrice about it, but she thought it was probably a coincidence. Alan still thought that she had noticed and she must have changed during this time. The guy thought that no matter how you look at it, every sword was forged the same way and of heavy steel. And he wondered what kind of person did it. Finally, a foot appeared on the threshold. The man was wondering what kind of nonsense he was talking about. Alan's gaze immediately turned to the girl who had just come out. He was surprised at how quickly she came out. The girl said that she was just in the workshop. Beatrice decided to joke and say that she decided to go out to meet them. The blacksmith immediately began to deny it and said that it was just an accident. Alan realized that they were right after all, along with Beatrice. The girl thought that they had not been taught manners because even if they were telling the truth, it was not worth speaking badly about people. Liz smiled and said that she had not changed at all. The girl answered that she had not changed either, except perhaps in appearance. Then the blacksmith decided to find out if they had forgotten about the boy who stood next to them. The girls immediately realized that they had forgotten to introduce him, and Liz began to apologize for this. Alan said that everything was fine and wanted to make sure that this was the same friend she was talking about. Liz immediately became embarrassed and said that the guy had just said something very rude. Alan began to apologize very awkwardly because he had meant something completely different. After all, she had told him earlier that the first princess would not be able to make friends. But Alan was glad that these problems were resolved and again smiled very sincerely. The girl was shocked that he could even remember this, and he immediately confirmed it. The golem turned its head towards Beatrice, flying towards it. It had a malicious smile. It already knew what it would do next. The monster opened its mouth and let out a deafening roar. That's why he became her partner, because initially he wanted to support her in everything, and this feeling has not changed. Liz was very embarrassed by this, and she covered her mouth in embarrassment. She thanked him very much. The girl from the blacksmith's asked them to listen to her. She asked them to stop flirting with each other in someone else's house. Liz immediately became very embarrassed and said that they were not flirting, but talking about business. The blacksmith finally introduced herself, saying that her name was Noelle, and she asked to love and favor her. And the girls introduced Alan. The girl was introduced Alan. The girl was already interested in what business they had with her. Beatrice wanted to ask to make a sword for Alan, but the girl said flatly that she would do nothing for him. But Beatrice kept saying that they would like to pick him up, and in the end she realized that she had been refused. She understood that No had the right to choose her own clients, but they had asked her as friends. Beatrice thought that she was very busy and asked her not to refuse them without reason. The blacksmith said that was exactly it. She was very busy right now and didn't have time to fulfill other orders. And if they were going to buy a sword, they could have done it from other blacksmiths. Noelle didn't understand why she should care at all. Liz said that she wanted to make the best sword for Alan, and among all her friends, Noelle was the best blacksmith. But the blacksmith thought that Liz was now starting to suck up to her, and immediately thought that maybe it was praise. Liz said that she was telling it like it was. But Noelle pointed out that he already had a sword. Alan awkwardly said that only one fragment remained. The blacksmith noticed that he had a broken piece, and said that she refused all the more. It didn't matter to her what he did with it, but she would not forge a sword for a man who treated the weapon like that. Noel asked the guy's name again and asked to see his sword again. She looked at it for a while and told the guys that she had changed her mind. The girl smiled and said that she would forge a sword for him. Everyone asked again in surprise. The girl realized that this was his goal from the beginning. Her shield began to hiss. This surprised Beatrice, who also noticed that the shield the king had given her began to melt. She thought that this was very ridiculous. But before that, she had to ask him something. Alan was waiting impatiently for the question. The girl asked him if he wanted to own a sword that would surpass the sacred one in power. There were footsteps in Westfall's house. The Duke stood by the window and realized that Brad had returned. He confirmed it, and his father wanted to know the result. Brad replied that the army was unnecessary, because he had sorted everything out himself. He asked his father to leave all the work to him, and he would try to do everything in the best possible way, so that he would be aware of the fact that there was no hope for that loser. At this, the boy bowed in respect. At this point, Alan asked Noelle about the sacred sword, and she replied that it would be worth more than 100 swords. Beatrice explained that when Noelle worked in the royal capital, she was considered one of the best in her field. And it wasn't just in terms of skill, but also speed. And when it became known that she was moving here, they tried with all their might not to let Noelle go. Alan said that after looking at these swords, everything became clear to him, because they were much better than the swords he made for himself. All the swords in this workshop, without exaggeration, are of high quality and are not inferior to others, and especially since Beatrice gave her approval for this business. Therefore, he had no reason to refuse. Noel agreed approvingly. Liz thought that she looked very pleased. The girl wanted to agree on the deadline. She said that she would need 10 days, after which they could come to her workshop in 10 days. Liz asked again about the deadline in surprise, because she thought that she was going to make it from scratch. Noelle confirmed this, and Liz was worried that she was not getting much rest. Kuznets replied that she was fine and had long since gotten used to it. And besides, now she had a reason why she had to forge the sword even if she couldn't. Alan understood everything and said that they would see each other in 10 days. The boys waved to Noelle as they left the forge. The girl looked at Liz because Beatrice shouldn't have disappeared here without protecting her. Liz was still sitting in a prayer pose. She thought about the knight's words, that she wanted her to survive, even at the cost of her life. But the blacksmith herself stood with a very serious face, and suddenly she remembered her childhood, how she looked out from behind the corner, watching her mother. After all, when she forged swords, she always did it with a sad face. But even despite this, for some reason, she felt like she was enjoying it. Noel thought about the hero and the sacred sword, and it worried her a lot. The guys, leaving the blacksmiths, stretched and thought about what to do next. Liz reflected that she had never seen Noelle in such a spirited mood, and perhaps they should not disturb her until she had finished her work. Beatrice suggested that they just wait somewhere quietly, so it seemed that Alan wanted this too. The guy confirmed, and Beatrice said that they would wait somewhere until their swords were forged. Alan remembered something. He asked about the presence of business in the town where they were. He told the girls to ignore him and just go about their business. The girls immediately became embarrassed. Beatrice started talking again and said that perhaps it was unfair of them not to tell him, although he probably didn't even need to know this, but since he was interested, she would tell him everything. After all, to tell the truth, her general had died about 3 months ago. Alan's face instantly changed and he couldn't believe it, but Beatrice confirmed it, because the commander's skill was one of the strongest in the kingdom. After all, a gift capable of raising the fighting strength of each fighter under his command. And it could be said without exaggeration that a commander is half the military power of the kingdom. Liz pulled the girl by the cloak in a sad voice. Beatrice turned to the Lises, saying that whatever it was, there was nothing they could do together. And she should have known that too. Liz said they could have left Alan out of it. But now that the kingdom had lost its general, it was possible that allied countries could invade these lands. The House of Westfeld, located on the southern edge of the country, was an ally of this kingdom. Liz realized that the attacks had stopped, which meant that the monster would be here soon. This monster was not an opponent that she could defeat alone. Beatrice turned to Liz. She tried to tell her to run away, because she had to live. But, however, they will not be able to come to the rescue, because now they themselves have problems with demons. Alan thought that if everything is left to chance, then this country will come to an end. However, now he had the right to refuse help and enjoy the quiet days, and he would not have to endure those evil looks again, which he had to witness in the past. But on the other hand, Liz and Beatrice could lose their homeland. The guy eventually agreed, but he honestly admitted that he didn't know what he could do with it or if he would be useful at all. If they were satisfied with his help, they could count on him. The girls thanked him for his help. The boys walked and talked. Alan was interested in how the general died. The girls began to tell him how it all happened. It happened one morning, 3 months ago. The general, who had always been an early riser, did not wake up. Sensing something was wrong, the general's wife went into his room and found him lying headless. They had failed to identify the criminal or his motives and were completely stumped. Alan thought they didn't know what steps to take. The guy also decided to ask the girls if there was anything unusual at the crime scene and gave the example of magic or some kind of ability. Leek replied that no traces of other abilities were found, except for those used by security. Alan understood everything and said that there was a high probability that demons were involved in this incident. However, the demons preferred to fight the enemy face to face. This was also due to the fact that there were almost no living people who had fought demons, so the story was shrouded in mystery. In this case, he assumed that there was a possibility that someone was in cahoots with the demons. Liz admitted honestly that she had no idea who to suspect because they couldn't control everyone who entered the border. Alan said again that there were different racial groups living in the city, and it seemed to him that this was a great place to gather information. However, it would be suspicious to ask everyone so easily because he was from the Westfeld family, and it would be difficult to ask everyone so directly. And she, in turn, thought that she had to come up with a way to survive. A hand reached out to Lisa. These were her memories. A voice was heard, trying to understand whether she was his bride and thought that it was difficult to get married at such an age. Beatrice said that of course they suspected and even interrogated. They were investigating at the state level. And as far as he knew, the Westfeld house was the closest to the demon border. However, they cleared them of all suspicion. Alan was surprised by this. He honestly did not expect that they would brighten the reputation of his house so much. But then another question arose in him. Because he did not understand now why Liz was going with Beatrice. She replied that she had some suspicions, and immediately after the incident, she went to look for the suspect. Alan understood everything and asked if she could tell what she thought about all this. But the girl remained silent. She decided to tell about the general's destruction a little later. They found themselves in a crowd of people, and Alan realized that he, too, would not have told about state secrets in a crowded place. Beatrice remarks that he was perceptive, and the boy picked up on this and said that he himself would not have wanted to start this conversation again anyway. But he simply thought that there might be people in the city who had something to do with this incident. The girl looked at him with a smile and said that it would be better this way than nothing. Alan realized that they had come to this conclusion only thanks to her. The girls looked at him with a smile and said that they were counting on him. He smiled at them too. The girls were excited about their new home. They couldn't believe that such a city had such luxurious houses. They stayed in a hotel room, which consisted of several rooms. But in fact, Liz herself was surprised that there was such a rich number here. Alan, smiling broadly, said that who would have thought that he could earn such money? 2 hours earlier, the guys were carrying out tasks from the customer, delivering goods, carrying out other tasks, making intermediary sales, selling material layer. They were at the River Guild branch, and that's where it all happened. They were met by the guild secretary, Nadia Bentix, who greeted them and warmly welcomed them to the River Guild itself. The appeal was repeated, and the boy lying on the bed already had his eyes open. His brother, calling Alan a loser, ordered him to wake up because he did not understand how much longer he could sleep, because his father was calling him. It was Alan, still smiling and holding out his hand. He said that she was more than the boy deserved. Liz didn't understand why she was having flashbacks of him again. At that moment, the boy said that he would take care of her. Alan would like to start with the sale of materials. He wondered if it was possible to start right here. Naya said that he could easily start and gave him special materials and certificates. Beatrice asked him to wait with his ID. She handed over some money to the counter, and Alan thought that this was not right. But Beatrice assured him and said that she had paid half the commission fee for him, and she asked him to accept it as her gratitude, and the girl smiled broadly at him. Alan thanked her and said that in that case he would accept their ID. Alan handed Nadia his material, and the girl thanked him and began to evaluate his data, asking them to wait a little. She realized that the guy had a divine gift that could evaluate the value of the materials obtained. She asked him for forgiveness and was a little embarrassed because she didn't understand where he got such material. The guy felt awkward and didn't know how to tell her about it, but he laughed a little hysterically. She couldn't believe what was in her hands. It was a dragon scale. And before she finished speaking, the girl's gaze fell on the certificate. She turned pale, and sweat began to flow from her forehead. As it turned out, the ID card that lay before her belonged to the Silver Maiden. Beatrice awkwardly asked again and realized that she was probably nicknamed that because of the armor she wears when she works as an adventurer. Liz said that she knew, of course, that Beatrice worked as an adventurer on her days off. But this was the first time he had heard of her nickname. The girl explained that even during her days off, she always wore silver armor and a sword so as to never forget that she served Mistress Liz, and apparently that was why she was nicknamed that. Alan was amazed that Beatrice did not forget about her mistress even during her days off, but she said that she had heard it 100 times already. Nadia was already melting with excitement and awkwardness. The girl still did not understand why she continued to remember him. Remember Alan. The monster's mouth opened again, tearing the girl out of her memories. Suddenly a voice rang out, mockingly saying that she was still remembering him. Suddenly, Liz said the name of Mr. Alfred. Beatrice immediately became embarrassed and fell silent. And Liz continued that her friend had told her so many times. Alan realized that, apparently, it was Liz's father who had passed away 5 years ago. But in any case, Beatrice was very strong, so everyone here already knew her. The knight stood there all embarrassed and said that the lady praised her too much. Nadia apologized and said that even she could not evaluate such a rare specimen. She just needed to consult with someone. The secretary immediately ran to the director to report that she had a dragon scale in her hands. Alan was surprised that she was so ruffled, and it was all because he had stumped her with his rare material. The guy asked not to shift all the blame onto him. Suddenly, a man approached them, apologizing for distracting them from their conversation. He asked them not to be angry that he was so unexpected, because usually they did not care about adventure stores. But having heard about the dragon scales, they could not stay away. There was a girl standing behind him who was very interested in hearing this story. He asked him to tell her more about how they got it. The man apologized for such an impudent question, but he suddenly heard the secretary screaming and could not pass by. His companion, apparently, was also interested in him. Alan thought about it and realized that it was the grandfather and the Amazon. Beatrice thought they came from the south, because the Amazons live on the southern continent and are a very warlike and vigilant race. She hoped they didn't look like adventurers. The man kept repeating the conversation he had heard about the dragon scales, and he thought it was a wonderful story. Liz laughed and thought that they really just loved stories like that. But the man was only interested in the scales and asked about the one who got such a specimen, and even suggested that someone was a hero. The guys were puzzled, but Alan said that the man had a diamond eye, although Alan was right in front of her eyes. The guy covered the monster's mouth and looked straight at the girl sitting on her knees. He let go of the monster's hand, and it immediately opened its mouth. A loud roar was heard from the monster. The old man immediately exclaimed joyfully and said that the boy deserved the greatest praise, because they had no idea how many topics for conversation he now had. Alan said that it was not difficult for them to please the two seekers. The man thanked the boys and asked them to forgive him, but it was time for him to leave, and he said goodbye to them. The man watched them through the peak of his hat. Liz was a little surprised, but she happily turned away. The man looked at the Amazon, and she, without taking her eyes off, looked at the departing boys. At this time, loud sounds and clicking were heard in the forge. It was Noelle who was trying to make a sword for Alan, tired and wet from the heat of the forge. She forced herself to continue and remembered her mother, who never gave up, even when things were hard for her. That is why she will not give up either. She clearly told herself that she will definitely be able, and she will succeed in forging a sword that will surpass the sacred one in strength. At this time, the girls greeted Alan, who returned home. He apologized for coming so late. The girls said that they hadn't been waiting for him for very long, and there were no leads on the exterminator today. Liz apologized for that, but Alan asked not to apologize for that. There was no information in the guild about the general either. He himself had not been particularly involved in searching today. However, there was one rumor that there was probably someone in the southern forests. Liz said she had heard about it too, that there was something dangerous going on there and that there were a lot of people from the city who had never returned. Beatrice thought she meant that no traces had been found there either. Alan said that he felt the presence of some powerful force, although he could not describe it in words, but it seemed to him that someone was trying to confuse them in this way. The girls looked at him puzzled. 10 days passed and the boys came to Noelle for his sword. The girl was lying on the floor and did not react. Alan did not understand why the girls were so calm, but Liz silently looked at the guy and went towards the lying girl. Liz turned to Alan because she didn't understand why they were there. He turned to the monster and wondered about its regeneration and wondered about the core inside it. He turned back to the Liz, saying that they would talk about the rest later. Beatrice suspected that something similar would happen in 10 days, and Liz added that no matter how many times she told her, she still did everything her own way, and when she woke up she would scold her properly. Liz began the healing process by illuminating the room with light. Beatrice was surprised that Alan said nothing about it. He looked at her and smiled awkwardly because now he was interested in something a little different. They went outside, and Alan started testing his sword. Noelle watched closely. She wanted to know his opinion about the swords. He replied that the swords fit well in the hand. The girl was already angry that he was saying the same thing. But the guy said that every sword here is good. Noel forged 3 swords especially for him so that he could choose the best one. But the guy wanted to know how she was feeling because if she fainted again, Liz would be very angry with her. The girl said irritably that she was fine. She just wanted to hear his opinion about the swords. The girl lowered her head and fell silent. The guy got scared, and she said that in any case, he would not be able to figure out which sword was better until he fought a strong opponent. But since she was only interested in his opinion, he himself would go and look for someone to fight. The girl shouted for him to strike while the iron was hot. But he firmly decided that they were going to look for the monster. And looking at her, he mentally begged her to go. Alan had managed to defeat quite a few monsters. Noel thought that he wanted to continue, but she didn't understand why he didn't ask why she brought him into such a thicket. The guy replied that she had said from the very beginning that they were going to test the swords on formidable opponents. The girl agreed, but she wanted him to say what the reason was, and she did not understand why she was calm and why she did not refuse. He replied that he did not sense any evil intentions from her, and he thought that this force was involved in an incident. He took out a long sword that cuts down demons. The girl opened her mouth in surprise because the monster stopped and whether it could withstand another attack. Beatrice grabbed the sword with her last strength under the roar of the monster. They saw a monster who was sleeping and wounded, but they didn't understand why he was there. The girl called him brave, and he thought he could take that as praise. Now they were trying to figure out what kind of beast it was, because it was quite strong and was devouring the other monsters in this forest, and it would not be surprising if it attacked the city soon. Noelle wanted him to cut it down with one blow. The guy apologized because he didn't mean it. He thought they couldn't defeat him now, because this monster can block certain attacks, and he knew that some monsters had these so-called blocking barriers, but this was the first time he had seen one, and he realized that this monster was a high-level one. Noelle thought the same because with the current preparation the sword would not destroy the monster. However, with a certain forging, the barrier could be broken. So she suggested improving something about the sword. Alan wanted to make sure that she believed him. She confirmed with a wide smile and asked to tell. But a haze appeared on the field. It was the same Amazon from the guild. She was spreading the haze along the edge and watching the two near the tree. She didn't understand why he was there, because she had been told that this guy was not worth paying attention to at all. But she thought that she should report what had happened. She immediately thought even harder and realized that it would be better this way. In the forge, Noelle worked until exhaustion again. And finally, she got what she wanted. She fell to the floor again and realized that she was still insignificant, and she still had so much to do. So she had to make a sacred sword. She remembered her mother saving her from the monster that had already attacked her mother and left nothing behind. Noelle sat on the floor and looked at the tiles, tears in her eyes, and she clutched her dress. She decided that before she gave this sword to Alan, she should test it better on this monster. She stood right in front of him and held the sword in her hand. She thought that maybe this wound was difficult, but at that moment he turned away. She also felt that he underestimated her greatly. She decided that even if only a little, she needed to buy time for Liz. Noel picked him up and the monster immediately opened its eyes. He immediately jumped right on top and the girl started fighting him off. Suddenly he hit her so hard that blood started pouring out of her mouth. The sword fell out of her hand and blood was flying everywhere. She realized that her body stopped obeying her and moving. But it was okay, because even if she disappeared, the workshop would go to Alan. She was sure that he would defeat this monster. But she was so bitter because she was so strong in comparison to her. Noelle didn't understand why she couldn't even land one blow. Suddenly the sword was picked up from the ground. People started looking at it and saying that it was very skillfully forged. Someone asked her if she made it herself, because with such a sword, she could have damaged his Fenrir, but he was still sorry that things had turned out this way. In front of her stood a man from the guild, holding Alan's sword in his hands. Noelle realized who it was, and the man was surprised that she could still speak, but he didn't think that she would come to him herself. The girl tried to find out what he was planning. He answered, something like before, or she thought that he was going to attack the city with these monsters. His original target was her. She looked at him and realized that 3 years ago he had done this, and it was he who had attacked her. Just after she had forged the strongest sword, the man remembered this, but his target was not her at that moment, because if he had left things to chance, she would have been a threat to the city. He realized that she had been with that girl then, and everything became clear to him. And why did the sword seem familiar to him? He realized that she was her student. He said that it was a surprise for him, and that he would have to destroy Noelle as well, while the man continued to marvel at the sword, because she couldn't let herself disappear in vain. A scream was heard calling Alan. At that moment, he rushed past Beatrice, who looked at him with an exhausted expression. The guy, as he thought, the monster really had a core. The man thought about it, and the girl said that if he destroyed her, he would not get this sword. He did not understand what she meant. And in general, he offered her to take his side, which surprised the girl. He added that he would not torture her, but would pay for the work. And besides, a similar girl already works for him. The man thought she needed to think, but Noelle shouted in the negative and added that she would pray in the next world for him to disappear painfully. At that very second, he ordered the Fenrir to eat her, but then Alan jumped out, destroying the Fenrir. He asked for forgiveness for being late. The girl looked up and saw a sword in his hands. The guy explained that when he came to the workshop and she was not there, he had a bad feeling about this. The man was glad to meet Alan. He did not think that he would run into him here, and called him an interesting person right there. And then he understood for whom the sword was forged. It seemed interesting to him. But he was not so corrupted as to rejoice in men, and he laughed, saying that with his strength he could not overcome Fenrir, which meant that he could not defeat him. He asked again about his side, and as compensation he would let Noelle go. She screamed for him not to worry about her. But Alan had no reason to accept his offer, which surprised the man, and he again ordered Fenrir to destroy him. Alan used the power of the sword, which cuts with one blow. The man became nervous because Fenrir was destroyed. Alan repeated that the sword fits comfortably in his hand and is even better than he expected. He realized that in that case, the monster would disappear if the core was destroyed. Alan flew up and said that he didn't really want to use it, but there was nothing he could do about it. The old man couldn't believe it and immediately disappeared from sight. Alan considered this a wise decision, because it quickly dawned on him that he could not defeat him. Noelle screamed towards Alan, asking him to catch up and grab him because he had destroyed someone dear to her. But the guy refused, saying that there were more important things to do. The girl fell down without strength. In the quiet city, someone's legs were running. It was an Amazon in the night streets. She came into the house and looked at everything, just as emotionlessly. She remembered the old man's words and had to carry out the order, because if she couldn't, she knew what would happen. She had to destroy her. The target was Liz, and the Amazon was already in the house. The Amazon stood in the hallway opposite Liz, who was confused by her appearance. The Amazon did not understand why she was there, and at that very moment she received a blow to the face. It was Beatrice, who was trying to understand why Mrs. Liz had left the room. The girl replied that she had left on purpose to lure her in. The Amazon did not understand why this had happened. Beatrice asked her not to move, and Liz held out her hand and asked her sadly to tell them what brought her here. The Amazon was tied up and had her head down, and then she looked at the girls, and they were looking at her expectantly. The three of them were standing in the room, and suddenly Liz raised her head. Alan entered the room with Noelle hanging on his shoulders. The guy smiled as usual, and Liz immediately ran towards him. After the night, the morning came. The laundry that had been hung out overnight was hanging on the lines and fluttering, and Alan was in a crowd of people. He realized that there were no more monsters in the forest, and that's why people started coming. There was a bright flash. Tears came to Alan's eyes. He used the power he had acquired in his past life, and this was the right moment to use it. And glowing swords began to rain down from the sky. The guild was now discussing the skilled swordsman who had slain this monster. Everyone was wondering who it was. The guy had come to the forge again. He went inside and saw the Amazon there, who greeted him. Alan said that since she was serving a guest, she should do it with a smile, and handed her some fruit. Noel said that he had come to them again, and thought that he liked the girl. Alan had put it on her, because she had taken her in. The girl hadn't understood what he was hinting at. He had been surprised when she had suggested it. Memories flashed of her taking the girl to her. Beatrice asking to wait because she was trying to destroy Liz. But Noel didn't wish her any harm. And anyway, if she was going to attack, it wasn't of her own free will. Liz stopped Beatrice from appearing because they still got valuable information. The man was a demon, which meant he was also involved in the general's case. Beatrice agreed that the information was valuable. The Amazon looked at Noel. The girl realized that he was constantly intimidating her, and before destroying her, he gave her an ultimatum and made her his thing. Noel said she had stood firm, and the Amazons had tears in her eyes, and she thought it was bitter. The Amazon cried and clutched her clothes. Alan realized that in any case, very soon he would no longer come every day, because they managed to find out that the demon, with the help of the gift, could take over the will of a person, as with Melina, and he was worried that she might have a side effect from this gift, so he came every day. Noel thanked him and he waved his hand, saying that he had some business. Melina asked to wait and thanked him. The boy swung his sword using the sword skill of power, or, to be more precise, the end of the world Hyakariorn. At that very moment, he dropped on the golem's head, striking it with his sword. The monster immediately disappeared, leaving behind clouds of dust. The guy smiled, and Noel shouted at him that his materials were quite difficult to use, but she would definitely find a use for them, so he could wait. Alan waved his hand and said that he would wait. At that time, something was happening in the forest. It was a man who did not understand what this incredible power was. He didn't understand who Alan was because this boy was special, and he needed to be told about it urgently. For their safety, it was worth temporarily retreating from this country. The man ran quickly. Suddenly, he stopped and started laughing. He didn't understand where the guy got his strength from and how strong he was. He even felt a little sorry. Alan's sad watched down, and the man said that one would see this one's strength owned with eyes. After all, this day was just beginning. The boy continued to call Alan names, now calling him trash. After all, he should be grateful, because his father felt compassion for him. Exhausted and tired, Beatrice turned to Alan, who immediately turned to her in response, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The guy also noted that Liz was fine. The girl agreed, stuttering a little, not expecting such an answer from him. Alan immediately said that, first, Beatrice needed to be healed. The girl lay down on the grass and said that, what will be, will be. The guy asked her not to worry, because it will heal soon. He raised his hand over her, from which a hissing sound was immediately heard. Alan used the power of healing, namely the magic of truth, called parallel paradox. Immediately, a healing light appeared and the guy's face was very serious. Beams of magic began to fly in different directions near Beatrice's body. The girl immediately began to shake, and there was obvious surprise on her face. She saw that the wound on her body had completely disappeared, and what struck her most was that her clothes had returned to their original state, which seemed incredible to her. Beatrice was about to say something about it, but Alan interrupted her, saying that it didn't matter. Liz happily jumped up to the guy and said that there was no power that could heal wounds, but as expected from Alan, he did it. The boy laughed and asked to change the subject. He wanted to tell them that the truth was that he had been thrown out of the Duke's house that morning. Alan wondered if they knew about it. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. They couldn't believe it, and Liz even screamed loudly in surprise. Beatrice couldn't even imagine that something like this would ever happen, because Westfall were extremely status-dependent people. She didn't understand what they were thinking. The girls immediately dropped their hands, showing that they were sorry, and the situation was the most terrible. Liz asked him, as his ex-fiancée, if she could help him with anything. The guy realized that these two do not change at all. Alan said that since she was no longer his fiancée, there was no reason to worry about him. Beatrice didn't understand what he was planning to do next, and the guy himself didn't know what to do, so he thought about it and decided to ask the girls for a favor. He wanted to accompany Liz. Beatrice looked at him either happily or puzzled. Her face showed mixed feelings. She thought that his family was rude to Alan. The doors to the room opened and insults were directed at Alan, asking him to show his impudent and stupid face and listen carefully because, from now on, Alan sat down on his knee in front of the man. Memories of Liz defending Alan flashed through her mind, repeating his name several times while crying. The girl said that the guy was a great person, not a loser. Alan looked away and said that if they were okay, he would be okay too, smiling kindly. And now a week has passed since their meeting. They were in a village located in a remote region. The girl held a sword in her hand and introduced herself, saying that her name was Akira Kazuragi and that she was the hero of this generation, asking to give him the opportunity to apologize in advance because she would be careful with them. But if she crossed the line, she would apologize. Akira pointed her sword straight at Alan's face, thus addressing him, smiling smugly and placing her hand on her side, challenging him to a fight. Shouts of surprise and irritation were heard in the Duke's estate. Someone stamped his foot, scolding the knight for not having managed to do anything. The knight began to tremble, realizing that he had done wrong, and the man threateningly pulled out his sword. The knight felt very sorry because he had only conveyed the words of the alchemist to Dano. The man loomed over the knight menacingly and ordered him to be silent immediately. The man threateningly asked the knight, calling him shameless, to repent of his sins. He was taken aback and asked to wait, and the man asked not to panic, because he only needed to play his next card. At that moment, a horse-drawn cart was driving through the field, rattling a little as it bumped into the stones along the road. Alan was sitting in it and telling how he had been driven out of the house and why. He asked for forgiveness for his sudden revelation. Beatrice understood his circumstances, but he had a gift, or rather a power, which he used to heal her wound. She did not understand how he was able to return the fading body to its original state. After all, no matter how she thought about it, such a wound could not be healed even by using the highest healing potions. There was a look of incomprehension on the girl's face, because as she thought, that gift was level 6, and he continued that Alan should be expelled from the house of the Duke of Westfeld. The guy lowered his head, and there was no emotion on his face. Liz clapped her hands happily. She thought it was true. Because the Archbishop's gift is the 5th rank, and almost no one has a gift higher than the 5th rank. At present, a gift that is above the 5th level cannot be recognized or evaluated in any way. That is why the Archbishop could not recognize Alan's gift. The boy was puzzled. Liz continued, addressing Beatrice, that Alan's healing gift should be equivalent to the 6th rank. The knight thought about it, because it made sense if that was the case. Alan wasn't sure if she was being insightful or frivolous, laughing nervously and hysterically. He wanted to know if it was okay for them to know his true power now, because he was wondering if it would be okay for them to travel with a man like him. Beatrice thought about it and said that for the sake of the country, she should of course bring him back home. But Liz stopped her right away. The girl said that the priority of a friend was higher than the benefit of the country, which surprised Beatrice. Liz hesitated a little, saying that for such a thing, she could definitely be expelled from the royal family. But even if she thinks so, building a country by sacrificing someone is wrong. Alan opened his mouth in surprise, quietly calling the girl by name, but Beatrice smiled, approving of her mistress's words. She supported the words and agreed with him, continuing that, like the lady, she also prioritized her friends. Alan smiled awkwardly and said that he understood everything and thanked the girls for their friendliness towards him. Beatrice said there was no need to thank her, and Liz sheepishly said please, smiling at the guy. Suddenly, Alan realized that since they were friends, they could skip these formalities with each other, surprising Beatrice with her words. She immediately replied that she had already done so, because for her, as someone who always spoke like that, it was a drastic change. But Alan did not mind being addressed without any formality. Long ago, he was a hero. Alan was still sitting on his knee and understood his father's order. He stood up and turned around. In front of him stood the servants who bowed. But now he is the son of such a duke, moreover. Since the moment of rebirth, he has become a failure. Liz immediately said that it was not fair, because she also wanted Beatrice to address her without formalities. And Beatrice in turn said that for a knight, such things were impossible, and she could not allow herself to do such a thing. Suddenly, someone turned to them from behind the cart, saying that they would soon be at the village gate. Liz looked in surprise and realized that the gate was already visible from here. Alan thought about it and realized that this was a village not far from the border. The boys thanked the cart driver for giving them a lift, and he replied that it was no problem for him because he was driving the same route as them. Alan thought about how it had taken him 10 days to get here after Liz and Beatrice had joined him. Because there was a village not far from the border, not far from the royal court of Westfell, Beatrice turned to the boys, showing that they were going here. They were immediately confused by the fact that the village was quiet. They thought that no one lived here. Alan thought that it looked more like a settlement, not a village. And yet, there was no sign of life. Alan wanted to ask the girls why they wanted to visit this village, but he was interrupted by a cry for someone to go home. This immediately made everyone turn around. They realized where the sound was coming from and decided to go see what was there. Someone shouted that he told her to go home, and the man rolled head over heels on the ground with a crowd of whispering people. The one who screamed had nothing to talk about with the person who had just been thrown out. Alan noticed that she had flown out of the door of a house that looked very much like the village chief's house, but he still didn't understand why so many people had gathered here. The girl lying on the ground tried to get up. She began to shake herself off and wonder at her new failure. She felt sick somehow. Akira noticed that there were more people, which surprised her greatly. She realized who it was, and Alan turned to Lisa to find out if she knew the girl. She asked him if he knew about the gift of bravery. Alan took the sword with him and was what they called reborn. The boy did not understand what to do now, because in his previous life, he was called a hero. The guy thought and remembered that every era one person receives a special gift, the most powerful gift, similar to military power. A great warrior, a person who has such power is called a hero. Liz wanted to come here after she found out about it, because she finally understood what the words become, light and banish darkness meant. It meant banishing darkness with the power of a hero. Alan and Beatrice didn't understand anything and asked for a better explanation so they could understand. Lisa pointed at Akira, introducing her to her friends, adding that the girl was the hero of this era. Alan understood everything and thought that they had some kind of problem that required the help of a hero. He asked the girl if he could just call her Akira, and she said she didn't mind. Akira asked them who they were. Alan and Beatrice immediately introduced themselves. The girl smiled and repeated their names, calling Liz Raisin. Alan awkwardly corrected the girl, who smiled even wider, asking for forgiveness, explaining that she was bad at remembering names. She was only interested in one thing, what they wanted from her. She still didn't understand what was going on. Alan replied that he thought it would be quicker if he asked her. Akira thought that if she told him, he would help her. The boy replied that his answer depended only on what she told him. The girl laughed and did not understand why he was asking her then. Alan said that he meant that it did not seem like the villagers would be able to tell them anything. Akira thought about it and said that he was probably right, but he was a bit shady, and she thought they were all a bit strange. Alan was surprised that they called him shady. The girl told him to judge for himself, because they were going to believe the stories of some stranger, and all just because he was a hero. And if it wasn't weird for them, then they were weird themselves. But the girl liked it. Finally, she agreed to tell. But in return, she said that she had one condition, because he was an unusual person. But she did not understand who he was. However, despite being a hero, he was hunted by assassins and had to live on the edge. He also faced the looks of horror from the people he saved. Alan was a little surprised, but she just knew it and offered him a quick fight, and he would be better off pulling out what he had on his belt. She pointed her sword straight at the guy's face. Akira told him that she and Alan would fight now, thus challenging him to a duel. People began to panic because they felt danger from this place. The guy thought about it and finally exhaled and agreed, but he had warned her to watch her step and wanted to make sure she understood his instructions. The girl smiled, realizing that he liked to talk. Alan swiped his foot on the ground, not waiting for Akira to announce the start of the fight. The girl jumped into the air, telling him to bite, but she was already looking at the sky, not at her opponent. She realized what had happened and said that it was sadness for the good. Alan repeated that he had warned him to watch his step. His face clearly showed a sense of calm. Akira fell to the ground with a loud crash, raising huge clouds of dust behind her. The guy looked at her, still with the same feeling of a winner. Akira rose from the hole he had made himself. She wanted to ask Beatrice what had just happened, because she did not understand it. The night girl thought about skills, because courage was one of the hereditary gifts. And among the 5 types currently existing, this type is more balanced. Alan, who was the 5th rank brave, flashed through her mind. She remembered that this girl, or rather what they said about her, that she was only 1 step away from the title of the strongest warrior in the kingdom, and that was 2 whole years ago. Beatrice was still trying to figure out who Alan really was to be able to deal with her so easily. She couldn't believe that House Westfield had actually banished him. Akira wanted to know if he wanted to continue. Alan replied that it was the 9th time and put his finger to his cheek, thinking about the answer. The girl understood that she had already received so many times, but in the end, it was just sparring. The action takes place in the city, on one of the busy streets. Leaflets with the inscriptions, "Hunter, be careful," are pasted everywhere. Crowds of people move along the street and, it seems, do not notice anyone. He wondered if he had enough money to pay the rent. But after hearing his reasoning, Naya suggested that the guy just buy a house. Elaine asked her about the house, but the girl immediately assured him that they would simply deduct the amount for the house from his materials. The boy told him that he would surpass his older brother and would definitely take the place of the heir to the Westfield house in place of Alia. He looked at him silently, his hands hanging down. It seemed that it hurt him to hear such words from him. The guy turned away from him and went towards his room, and Alain remained standing in his place. But unexpectedly, Alain called his brother by name, forcing him to stop for at least a minute. He has no doubt that he will succeed, but only if Brad himself feels that he is wrong about something. Brad turned around and looked at Alain's face with a tense expression. Later, the action began to unfold in Brad's own room. Night had fallen, and the youngest of the brothers was trying to sleep, but sleep would not come to him. Suddenly, he jumped up from his seat and punched a nearby soft pillow hard. The boy cursed to himself. He held his hand out to the side, trying to focus as much as he could. Brad cast a spell for Send Off the Hero's Puppets, and thin threads began to emanate from his hands, seeping through the darkness. The doors to the young master's room opened, and the maids of this palace walked in. There was not a single emotion on their faces, and their eyes were completely empty. White, thin threads emanated from the girls and stretched towards Brad's right hand. The guy ordered them to urgently prepare everything necessary, and the girls very monotonously said that everything would be done. Brad decided that Alain was no longer there for him. He decided to reject his existence as a whole. The guy assures himself that no one will dare to look at him with such eyes, full of sympathy and pity. He believes that he was not mistaken. Brad knows for sure that he is not some kind of a freak of nature. He considers himself the most worthy candidate who will be suitable for the role of the head of this house and the head of this country. He confidently walks forward along the corridor. The image of his older brother and their not-so-recent conversation appears before the guy. He turns to Brad and, raising his eyes, assures him of one important thing. The guy took her words into consideration and admitted that it was a pretty good idea. He thought about it. What would happen if he had a house and a quiet life? If the guy himself feels that he is wrong, then Alain gives him a promise to definitely stop him, while saying all this with a smile on his face. Remembering this conversation again, Brad couldn't help but chuckle to himself. Brad, having reached the right hall, bowed to his father and wished him good morning. But at that very moment, Brad's eyes filled with fear, and his heart seemed to beat faster. The father addressed his youngest son by name and said that the time had come and they were beginning. Holding the letter in his hands, he turned his head towards Brad and said that the archbishop had received it. Then the head of the family burned the letter he was holding in his hands. He decided that now was the time to begin his sweet revenge on this whole country and this Lord God. His face reflected only the sweet taste of the coming changes. The action takes place in the present time. The travelers stopped in a village, simply filled with different, beautiful, lush, and tall trees, with tall houses to match them. Liz gets down from their cart, thanks to an outstretched hand from Alan. The guy looked somewhere to the side up. He noticed that the village was quite calm. This obviously couldn't help but please him. Beatrice also added that it would be good to find information in this place about Uncle Alfred and the suspects in the elimination of the general himself. The girl was a little puzzled by the current situation. One of the women, being a resident of the village, approached the travelers. She asked them if they were travelers and what brought them to such a place, more like a wilderness. It was unusual for her to see guests here, just like the others. Alain was the first to speak to her. The guy said that they were actually looking for one person here. The lady politely asked who they were looking for. Alain told the lady that they were looking for Liz's uncle, who had been missing for 5 years. He had heard from other people that he had been seen near the village they had just arrived at. The lady took their words into consideration. Nadia thought about it and remembered that the forest had become much calmer than before. Just as the girl wanted to add something to her words, she remembered something that she decided to share with the guy. She put her hand to her cheek and said that in this village there were people who had known each other for a long time, and she had never heard of such conversations, which made her think about this question. The lady suggested that the travelers ask the head of their village about this, and offered her help as a guide to him. All three were grateful to her for her help. A little later, the boys found themselves in a large and bright house, where a man who looked more like an old man was waiting for them on the threshold. He admitted that he was not used to seeing travelers in their village, and asked them to make themselves at home. The elder assumed that they wanted to ask him a couple of questions, and he was not mistaken, because Alain agreed. While Beatrice tried to tell the elder all the details of why they had come such a long way, Liz sat silently next to her, her head down. The elder listened attentively to their story and was also very puzzled by this situation. After the main story, Beatrice added that Liz's uncle was a very kind person and raised her as his own daughter. Liz pressed her hands even tighter to her knees, confessing to the elder that she really wanted to find him and talk to him. She raised her big eyes full of hope to him, and loudly began to ask him to think carefully. She asks him to tell her any information that would be somehow connected with him. Liz asks the old man if he remembers any similar person who was in this village, to which the man thought about it and tried to strain himself as much as possible to remember. Unfortunately, no matter how much he wanted to tell the guys this, he asked for forgiveness, and says that not a single passerby comes to mind. Silence hung in the room. No one dared to break it yet. The girl told him that there had been rumors for a long time about how someone had seen a famous person alive who had taken his own life several years ago. Alain asked who this celebrity was. Beatrice timidly asked the elder if he hadn't heard rumors about Mr. Alfred, who had gone missing but had been spotted in these parts. The old man apologized again, but as they themselves had already noticed, their village was not the largest and everyone knew each other well, so he would definitely not have let such information go in one ear and out the other. Beatrice stopped trying to ask anything else, realizing that further questions simply did not make sense. The old man quietly asked them to listen to what he was about to tell them. As an apology for not being able to help them investigate the case, the old man offered them a place to stay overnight at his house. This statement left all three of them stunned and unable to say anything to him. Beatrice told him that they were only causing him inconvenience, but the elder insisted that the house was too big for him, an old man, and besides, he was sure that they would have nowhere else to stay for the night. The old man told them that in just a couple of days, there would be a celebration in their village, and he recommended that they go and see everything with their own eyes. Elaine asked the old man about the celebration, but he replied that it would be a lot of fun. Beatrice took his words into consideration and said that it would be just wonderful. She spoke for the whole group and said that they would definitely take advantage of his kindness. Liz continued to sit silently in her place, her head down. The old man with a good-natured smile offered to show them around the rooms, to which Alan thanked him again. The guy looked at Liz, who continued to remain silent, but the girl seemed to be somewhere far away in her thoughts. She was now thinking only about her uncle. The girl remembers those happy moments in her life, when she ran to the arms of this big man who called her by name. Liz, being little, smiled happily at him, and the man smiled warmly at her too. He picked up the girl running towards him and deftly lifted her above himself, starting to spin her. Loud laughter spread throughout the area where they were, and it seemed there was nothing more beautiful than what she was seeing now. Nadia carefully showed him a sign with her hand so that Alan would lean his ear closer to her lips, and from her lips he heard a name that stunned him. This man was Mr. Alfred Beverstam. At that moment, the fleeting warmth and joy are replaced by the cries of a girl who's already grown up a little. She was shouting something to her uncle, but it was too late. A veil of tears clouded her eyes, and Uncle Liz only smiled happily, as if he knew that this was how it would be. The wind blows, fluttering the curtains in Liz's bedroom. The girl lies on a soft bed and tries to sleep peacefully, but nightmares about what happened to her uncle torment her very much. The memories came again and again, and here, young Liz stands, pressing her hands to her chest and asking the king himself, asking for an answer to her question. Is it true that her father tried to end his daughter's life? The king remains silent. She sheds bitter tears again, asking him why this happened. She asks her uncle to tell her everything, stretching her hands forward, but the silhouette only turns around and continues walking forward. She asks him not to leave her alone, but no one hears it. Tears roll down her cheeks. She wants to see for herself how cruel fate may be. She just wants to know the truth, and with these thoughts, pressing her hands to her chest, the girl tries to fall asleep. Several days had passed since the travelers had settled in the house of the elder of this village. The very holiday that the old man had told them about had arrived. All the people were dressed in gloomy costumes and masks, with beautiful bouquets of flowers in their hands. Elaine, Liz, and Beatrice walked slowly through the crowd and tried not to separate so as not to lose each other. Beatrice was simply amazed at what an unusual holiday it really was. Elaine turned to the girls and said that, if he was not mistaken, this holiday was dedicated to communicating with people who had left this world. Liz asked again if she understood correctly that this was a celebration of communication with people who had left this world, to which Alan answered in the affirmative. Liz was a little shocked by what was happening on these streets. Alfred Beverstam was the younger brother of the current king, who was second in line to the throne. However, he did not want to quarrel with his brother, and therefore, due to his abilities, became the head of the knightly order. Alan told the girls what the locals say. Once a year, at this festival, you can meet the spirit of a person who has left this world, but he thinks it is doubtful that this is possible in relation to the spirit of the general or Liz's uncle. However, as Alan said, perhaps they will be able to find witnesses who will tell them about these incidents. In any case, Beatrice noted that it is very noisy here. Suddenly, the village elder called out to them and made the children turn to face him. As the old man said, the most important condition of this holiday is that there should be no sadness. They called out to him as the village chief, realizing who they were talking to. The old man, with a smile on his face, told them that on this holiday people dress up as their lost friends and loved ones, and that it is an important holiday that soothes the souls of their people. Alan asked the man if he needed any help, to which the old man only smiled again and refused them. He asked them to wait for the most interesting moment, which would begin with the onset of darkness, and for now they should enjoy the holiday. Suddenly, there were cries from other villagers who also wanted to talk to their leader. The man kindly went to them to find out the reason. Alan simply watched as the elder walked towards his people. Beatrice thought about it, and shared her thoughts with her friends that all this was probably strange, but it seemed to her that on such a holiday, people should be sad about their friends and relatives, but no one shows sadness. They're all smiling, and it is quite strange for her to see this from them at such an event. As Beatrice said, in their country, people who have taken their own lives are taboo. You can't communicate with them or do anything to them, but in their village, it's a resurrection ritual where they have a chance to communicate. Such villages are usually burned to the ground. Elaine asked the girl if she was sure that she, as a knight, could turn a blind eye to all this, even though the village was in a rather remote area. The girl looked the guy in the eyes. Besides, this man is Liz's uncle. Alan took note of her words, calling such rumors quite interesting. Nadia said that in their area, there are often rumors about resurrected people, but after the death of Mr. Alfred, no one found his body. Then she turned her head away and said that she was not there to do her duty, but still, if no one caused any trouble to anyone at this festival, then she thought she could turn a blind eye to it. The time of the holiday went on and on. The sun was still high in the sky. First, the elder made a speech in honor of this holiday, to which he received a satisfied reaction from his people. Then there were songs and dances among the inhabitants. Each found a partner and whirled with him to the beat of the music. The guests of the holiday, who stood with their backs to the wall, watched all this. Alan stood with his arms crossed over his chest. He kept thinking that the holiday was rather strange, and he didn't really recognize the head of this village. And the inhabitants of this quiet place were only disguising themselves as other people. Alain continued to think that this was not a ceremony at all, even though he had initially almost believed that it was all for the celebration of communication with people who had long ago or recently left this world. The guy was shifting from foot to foot, completely not understanding what was going on here. Suddenly, one of the villagers approached them and asked if they were the same travelers who had visited these parts. He invited them to have fun with them, which excited the girls a little. Liz smiled at him a little and said that she would still like to rest a little more. The man took their words into account, falling a little into a stupor. In that case, he looked at Beatrice and turned to her. Maybe she, as the local called her, Madam Beautiful Night, would like to dance with him, which made Beatrice completely confused. She seemed not to understand who he was addressing now, but Liz quietly answered her friend that he was talking about her now. Liz gently began to push Beatrice towards the guy and asked her to go and dance with him, and she decided to wait for her here. Beatrice wanted to object to such an abrupt action, but she was not allowed to. The guy came to the conclusion that there was still a chance that the man was actually alive. The girl agreed and admitted that it turned out to be so. The guy asked her why she told him about it. The girl answered with a smile that she told him about it. The girl answered with a smile that she thought he would need this information. The guy took Beatrice by the hand and led her to the others to dance. Liz did nothing but smile at her sweetly and encouragingly. The boy gave Beatrice his bright smile, his cheeks slightly pink. He intertwined their fingers, while Beatrice was still trying to figure out what she should do. Liz was still staring at them, but suddenly smoke appeared near her eyes. It began to envelop her entire body, and in the air, someone said the girl's name. She did not understand what was happening and why the voice seemed so familiar to her. And in front, when she turned around at the sound itself, a black silhouette was visible, which was coming closer and closer to her. He said the girl's name again, clearly and naturally, so familiar to Liz herself. She pressed her hands to her chest and froze in place. Gradually, the smoke began to clear, and in its place appeared the figure of a man, dressed in royal armor and with a cloak fluttering in the wind. The girl could not believe what was happening to her. Tears began to flow continuously from her eyes, while she tried to muffle her quiet sobs and calm her trembling voice with her hand. Her uncle stood before her with a gentle smile on his face. The smoke was still swirling around their bodies. Liz screamed at her uncle to wait for her, but he didn't seem to be listening. The party was still going on. She looked through the crowd, hoping to see Aline or Beatrice, but neither of them were in sight. Tears were running down the girl's cheeks, and her face itself expressed anxiety and confusion. But she pulled herself together, stopped crying, and bit her lips. The girl turned and ran after her uncle, covering the distance through the dense forest. When her uncle stopped, the girl finally managed to catch her breath, leaning her hands on her knees. The man called the girl's name again, forcing her to pay attention to him. She casually flapped her ears while the guy stared at her. The guy asked her if she could see right through him, to which he replied that they weren't just working here for show. He asked if she was sure she wanted to be in such a place, and even alone with him. The girl did not expect to hear such a question from the man she had been looking for a long time. The girl told him that she thought she would probably say yes to his proposal. She asked him if she should be afraid of meeting her uncle, who had become her daddy, and asked him if her words were true. The man gave her a warm smile. Alfred chuckled and admitted to Liz that he was glad to hear her call him dad after so long. He closed his eyes and retorted that he was just an uncle to her. Memories flooded the man, and he recalls how with a tender smile, Liz ran into his arms, calling him her dad. His older brother was then tormented and could not accept the fact that he was her real father. The girl blushed a little and nodded her head, completely agreeing with him. The uncle asked her what she would like to ask him. At that turning point in his life, the man tried his best to convey the truth to the girl. In front of young Liz's eyes, her uncle was defeated in one of the cruel ways. Before he finally stopped breathing, the man told her to be careful. Now Alfred understands that Liz has many questions for him. But at this moment in time, he can only answer one of them. That day, before he lost his strength, the man told her that his brother, who was also Liz's father, had tried to end her life. At that moment, the girl was shocked by what she saw in front of her and could not utter a word. The girl began to bombard her uncle with questions about why her father was trying to eliminate her. What was the point of ending his own daughter's life? She was confused. Alfred said it was all very simple. Her father was the king. He could always put on his mask of lies when necessary, and Liz's uncle had no doubt about it. Already in the house, in Liz's room, the girl pounced on Aline with questions about whether all this was true. The guy looked at her silently, a little taken aback by such a sharp onslaught from the girl. He thinks that her father has already done this to her, because any self-respecting king cannot let a princess go alone to such a remote area. So he sent a man from the knightly order to protect Liz. She couldn't believe it. The man continued that since she had managed to travel so far, he would easily start hunting her. He was sure of it, while Liz was noticeably nervous. Alfred offered to explain everything to her, why he was doing this and what the reason was. The kingdom was hunting not only Liz, but also 4 other people. Namely, as the man tries to explain to her, the king hunts those who are born with a magical gift. He said all this in all seriousness. He emphasized that the first to fall was the general, who also had such a gift, and at that moment Liz felt as if she had been struck by electricity. She gritted her teeth, realizing that her uncle was right, and that everything was true. The case itself began in the royal capital, right during the investigation of the complete elimination of the general. For several days, someone was diligently watching Liz, and Beatrice asked her if the girl was sure about this. Liz answered that it was indeed so. Beatrice accepted her answer, and in that case suggested to strengthen security, just in case. Besides them, the girl promised to also try to be on the alert and control everything that was in her power. Someone was watching Liz and the other gifted people, and the girl felt it. Liz felt like something was wrong lately, and it couldn't help but bother her. She had the feeling that someone was always looking at her back, which made the girl stand rooted to the spot, even when the maids of this house addressed her. They asked the girl what was going on, but she remained silent. The girl pressed her hands to her chest again. She would never have thought that everything was so complicated. She tries to understand the very essence of these words, the most important thing. Her father tried to end her life. In the middle of this crowd stood Elaine, looking somewhere into the distance. The guy's hands were folded on his belt. The passers-by didn't even pay any attention to him. She knelt down in front of him and began to apologize, saying that it was an accident. The guy sitting on the couch said that everything was fine. Beatrice admitted to him that, to be honest, they came here not only about the general's business, but also because of information about Alfred. But still, the girl timidly answered her uncle that she still doubted it. She did not understand why he would hunt those who had the gift. For a while there was silence between them. Very quietly and with anger in his voice, Alfred said such a phrase as God's dolls. The girl did not understand his words, what they were for, and what he meant. But the man said that this is exactly what they are called. Alfred explained to her that a gift was something they had received from God, and in that case, God had put a piece of his power into you. That's what it really meant. It is a power that can defeat the dragon itself, a power that can recreate the most powerful weapon in the world, a power that can allow you to win absolutely any battle. Saying all these things, the man remembered each owner of the gift. And finally, Liz herself is a holy woman. Her image was like an angel, with long white hair and skin as white as snow. Alfred told her that Liz herself is a revelation from God. She's a creature that can do things that are beyond the power of ordinary people. Using this power of God, they all follow his plan. That is, he controls them like his puppets. The power they were endowed with had an enormous influence on the environment, and the man had no doubt about it. They could easily take this country into their own hands, but he immediately corrected himself that simply taking it seemed too easy for them. He assures that if they want, they can destroy it. Liz was not ready to hear all this. A drop of cold sweat ran down her cheek. She screams that they never even thought about something like that, but Alfred explains that it is all about the very possibility of this act and nothing else. As Alfred says, the very fact of the existence of people with the power of God is a threat, because all their actions are the will of the one who gave them power. Liz answered him that maybe he was right, and she really was the executor of God's will. But nevertheless, it was all just to make people much happier. Liz put her hands to her chest and timidly apologized to him for not telling her right away. It turned out that this was a personal matter between her and her uncle. In fact, it wasn't the first time that someone had noticed Uncle Liz's appearance. A long time ago, he was spotted in the very town where they were now. The girl had already started screaming, and she asked him if people would be happy, then this was not the right way. The man agreed with her. He continued his speech about the world, that it was created for the happy life of people. But her father decided to make it so that everyone achieves happiness by their own efforts. And for this purpose, he decided to eliminate those who have the gift. The girl was in a panic. She didn't understand how this could happen. Alfred seriously stated that he couldn't allow this to happen to Liz, so he had a proposal for her. The man extended his hand to her and suggested that they defeat the king together. The girl clenched her teeth and thought about what to say to him. She apologized to her uncle and said that even if he was telling the truth, she still believed that if she talked to her father, he would understand her. The man spoke his niece's name and said this to her. Her kindness would one day not only destroy her, but would also bring sorrow to those dear to her. He tried to reason with the girl, but she only clenched her fist and tried to object to him by saying that he had always told her before that no matter how difficult times were, the most important thing was to not stop believing in people. He took a step towards her, which scared Liz a little. She looked at him with apprehension. The man did not deny that he really told her this. She called her uncle again, realizing that the voice had changed greatly. She did not understand who was speaking through Alfred himself. The man told her not to worry about anything, because he himself would take care of her lifeless body. He took the sword out of its sheath and swung it at Liz. It was no longer her uncle, but some spirit who spoke her name. The man measured her with his eyes, telling her to just relax now and never breathe again. The man swung his sword at his niece. At this time, Liz tried to reason with her uncle, screaming for him to stop this right now. She closed her eyes as if she was about to get hit. The guy carefully raised his eyes to her and asked why she wanted to find him so much. This question stunned the girl, but then she gathered her thoughts and began her story about her uncle. But at that very moment, Alan appeared in front of Liz and Alfred. The guy blocked the blow of his sword, thus saving the girl. A spark appeared between them. Each looked into the other's eyes without fear or doubt at the moment when the girl screamed Alan's name. The man called Alan a kind of infection and ordered him not to get under his feet. Alan also decided to respond to the man's taunt by saying that he should not have interfered in their quiet life. The girl asked the guy how he knew what was going on here. Alan replied that he'd been watching everything that was going on here all this time. Alfred asked again about his name, and then asked Liz if he was her ex-fiancée, that same loser. The guy smirked at him and, looking him straight in the eye, declared that he was not going to negotiate with someone who was not acting of his own free will. Alan lowered his sword and clenched his fist until the bones crunched. First, the guy decided to use his technique, which is called the end of the world. A barely noticeable smoke was coming from his hand. The boy, using his left hand, struck straight towards Uncle Liz. It was a technique of subduing the fist. He exclaimed that now he had to return the body of the real Alfred to them. The silhouette turned black and began to crumble into thousands of pieces. After that, Liz's uncle collapsed to the ground, using his hands to keep his whole body from falling. Liz yelled at the guy, telling him what he had just done to him. The guy calmly told her that he had only tried to get him back. Alan was a bit blunt, but he still said that if she hadn't noticed, her uncle had long since left this world. The girl's eyes widened and a lump appeared in her throat. The guy had said the words she least wanted to hear at that moment. Someone else was controlling her uncle. She didn't understand it. She didn't understand what kind of technique it was that could be subjugated. Alain looked at Alfred with a smile and clarified that it seemed to him that he could move without any problems. Alain admitted to him that this was the first time he had tried this technique, and therefore he was not entirely sure of its functionality. Before her eyes, Liz's uncle was robbed of the lower half of his body by a demon. The man was returning home after a ball and was injured when he ran into a group of demons. After that, the ground suddenly gave way beneath his feet, and he fell straight into the sea. The man was extremely amazed and simply did not believe what had happened to him. He said either to himself or to Liz and Elaine that he was now moving of his own free will. The girl timidly called her uncle, and her eyes were full of amazement. The man looked at Alan. The body that was not in his power, it was he who managed to break it. the one who controlled it. The guy looked at him silently, without saying a word. Alfred bowed, pressing his right hand to his chest. He asked for Liz's forgiveness, because he tried to end her life, even if it was not of his own free will. And the man also added that, in fact, the kingdom was not hunting her, but nevertheless, having already straightened up to his full height, the man admitted that he truly hated the royal family. Elaine and Liz stood very close to the knight. Tears flowed down Liz's cheeks. Even before Alfred's unfortunate incident, when he was betrayed by the royal family, he decided to unite with those whom the man called bastards in order to take revenge on them all. As the man said, if you think about it seriously, they really brainwashed him then. The girl stopped crying and carefully asked who they were. Alfred said only one word to describe these creatures. They were demons. With that, the man decided to sum it up, because very soon the demon that controls Alfred's body will notice something is wrong, and they don't have any more time. He turned to Aline to ask the boy to fulfill one of his requests. Aline began to listen attentively to Liz's uncle. Alfred, with a smile so familiar to Liz on his face, asked the boy to keep a good eye on the girl. He has no doubt that his niece is a good girl, but unfortunately for him, she is a little crazy, so he worries about her very much. Liz again shed her tears, looking at the person dear to her. Elaine confidently told the man that he didn't have to say it at all, because he was going to do it anyway. Alfred thanked the guy for that, but he also had another request for him. The girl told him that such injuries were simply incompatible with life, but they were never able to find his body. At that moment, Liz did not have the power of healing, and so she simply froze in place, only watching such horror and fear. The man took his sharp sword out of its sheath and offered the boy to fight him just once. The boy didn't think long about the offer and said that it made no difference to him. The girl called the boy by name. She asked him why he was so calm. It seemed that Liz was nervous, but Elaine said that he was so calm because he had expected this outcome from the beginning. Moreover, as Elaine put it, the man himself wanted to entrust Elaine with his dear niece. From such words, the girl's face blushed, and she could not really say anything. Alain, with enthusiasm in his eyes, took out his sword and told the girl that her uncle wanted to check if Alain was a reliable protector for her. The man was pleased with how insightful the boy turned out to be. Alfred loudly declared that he was still capable of fighting, and so, as a knight, Alfred challenged Elaine to a duel. Uncle Liz deftly swung his sword in front of him and took a suitable stance for fighting. Alain admitted that he was really not comfortable fighting a man who had just regained consciousness. The boy took a stance, preparing his sword for combat. Alfred took a corresponding stance and warned Alain that he was quite strong. Liz pressed her right hand to her chest and silently watched from the side what was happening between them. The word dad kept spinning in her head. She was clearly worried. Even in her early childhood, young Liz would run after her uncle and call him father. She would tell him that he was so strong and jump into his tight embrace. A little girl with a smile on her face, quietly, in her father's ear, asked him. She wanted to know the answer, whether he could protect her from all the evil monsters that surrounded them. To which Alfred answered her yes. Long ago, the man had told his niece one thing. Until someone stronger could replace the knight, and until he was convinced of it himself, he would not pass on his role. At that moment, the clanking of metal echoed throughout the forest. The guy softly called her name, but the girl apologized to him first. She understands that it was impossible to help in that situation. Elaine looked straight into Alfred's eyes, not wanting to give in one bit. They were both serious. Meanwhile, the full moon was shining in the sky. The people of the village where Alan, Beatrice, and the fox were staying now began to dance their traditional dance. They began to say the words that they would spend this evening with the souls of those who had left this world. Only tonight will everyone have a chance to plunge into the dreams of communication between those who are still alive and those who have not breathed for a long time. It was at this moment that the battle broke out. No one wanted to give in to each other. Only tonight, all living things will dance with the non-living. Alang lunged back and dodged the sharp blade of his opponent's sword. The wind rose that night and fluttered the knight's cloak behind it. Alan, without any hesitation, swung his sword towards his opponent with his left hand. The technique the boy used was an instantaneous destruction of his enemy on the spot. The blow passed through Uncle Liz's entire body. There was no further response, and he simply collapsed to the ground, hitting his back on the cold grass. Liz stood there, her knees and arms tucked in close. The man said the girl's name very quietly, and tears began to stream from her eyes again. She immediately screamed and ran closer to him. The man apologized to her for having to see him like this. However, now Alfred was at least calm about his still little niece. He smiled tenderly at her, not paying any attention to the pain. This time, the man, as if speaking to himself, declared that he would definitely leave this world. But now with dignity, like a knight, like an ordinary person. Recalling the days when Liz was a little girl, Alfred admitted that she was like a daughter to him, that she called him her daddy. Beatrice added that just after Liz began to recover from what she had seen, rumors began to circulate that someone had seen her uncle alive. Moreover, there were rumors that her uncle was hiding, waiting for a chance to take revenge on the royal family for their cruel treatment of him. At such moments, the man always tried his best to hide his joy from her, as if he wanted to protect her from great affection for such a tender creature. Liz closed her eyes, already filled with tears, and pressed her uncle's hand to her cheek. She said that she loved him very much too. The man closed his eyelids, and small grains of tears also flowed down his cheeks. He said his niece's name for the last time and wished her happiness. The girl lay down on the torso of her uncle, who had long since become her father, and cried bitterly. The entire village was filled with its own festive atmosphere. The trees reflected the lights from the lanterns, and a melody played throughout the village, playing an important role in creating the festive atmosphere. People sang and danced in pairs. They circled in a dance, and when the flame went out, the holiday came to an end. The melody barely reached the place where Alan and Liz were, but they did not pay any attention to it. The guy stood silently, bowing his head, and Liz sat next to the lifeless body of her uncle. Suddenly, it started to rain, but they didn't care about that either. Sadness and melancholy were clearly visible on Alan's face, and a feeling of guilt was piercing him. Liz began to sob loudly, no longer holding back her emotions. She did not want to leave and abandon the body of her dear and beloved person here. All those who had long ago lost their lives returned to the afterlife, and the living must return to their daily lives. The pouring rain washed away all the dirt mixed with the red substance near Alfred's body. Time passed, and the weather was still overcast, with dark, cold-looking clouds. They did not allow the sun to break through. Alan stood on a small tower, fenced in with small blocks like a fence. Elaine said that it simply couldn't be, because he was the man who had given up the throne to avoid a power struggle. Liz burst into tears, admitting that his words were true. He had always cared for her and her father and was a kind man. The guy put his right hand to his forehead, imitating the visor of a Panama hat, and kept looking straight ahead. Suddenly, the village elder approached Elaine, with quiet, measured steps. He asked him if Elaine would allow him to ask him how long ago he had been able to notice something wrong here. Elaine turned half sideways to him, so as to see his interlocutor. She admitted to the old man that she had noticed these oddities from the very beginning of her arrival here. She knew that this village was not inhabited by real people, in whose veins life flows, but by people who had long since sunk to the end of life. And she certainly understood that this old man was controlling them. The boy made a guess, which was more like a statement on his part. G plus Elaine called the man a necromancer and asked if that was true. To this statement, the elder continued to smile in his face. Then his voice changed dramatically, and he decided to ask Elaine another question. If he knew about everything from the very beginning, then why did he keep silent and do nothing? Alan didn't let the old man finish his question, interrupting with his premature answer. Initially, he didn't want to interfere with this at all, because he didn't know whether his subordinates would harm them or not. They mix with the living here and live here peacefully. The old man still didn't calm down, and a malicious grin played on his face. It was not as if he wanted to interfere in all this, even knowing that he was a demon. Elaine smiled, it seemed, to himself and said that it was too hasty to conclude that if this or that creature was in fact a demon, then it would be considered necessarily evil. However, in any case, and be that as it may, Elaine admitted that there was no longer any point in him chewing everything over to the smallest detail. The guy put his left hand on his belt and scratched the back of his head with his right. The old man confessed to Elaine that, despite his youth, he could become a good puppet for him. The guy exhaled, having learned that all this time he hid them underground. Beatrice began to reassure her, and Liz only began to apologize more. Elaine closed his eyes and said that if she was so interested, why not just see for herself? The elder watched the guy calmly, and as he looked at him from all sides, he realized that the guy had incredible abilities. The elder decided to impress the boy with his abilities because his dolls, which were once people, can move even if they are left without a head. Almost invisible white threads began to emanate from the demon's hand. He confidently declared that they did not feel pain, so nothing could stop them. Elaine clenched his fist tighter. He was clearly not pleased to hear this. The demon suggested that Elaine check if he could withstand his onslaught. While he was quiet and did not have time to do anything, Elaine had already stretched his right hand forward and used the force first. At first, the guy captured his mind and interrupted his spell. From such machinations, the demon was perplexed and, having lost control of the situation, became very nervous. Then, Alan decided to crush him with just one blow, which was called the end of the world. The blade of the sword made a sharp sound, and passed through the bodies of long broken souls. Afterwards, the young man's crushing blow reached his main target, the old man, who was a demon. Elaine slowly walked forward, through a column of mud floating in the air. It seemed that time around him had stopped. Looking at the demon with cold, fierce eyes that could instill fear and horror in its victim, he admitted that he had forgotten to tell him one very important thing. Now, he was in a terrible mood. The old man was lying face down on the ground, and black smoke was coming out of him, enveloping him. He couldn't close his eyes, which wanted to roll out. Elaine told him that all human bodies, all their souls. The guy remembered the tears of his girlfriend, how she cried bitterly because she lost her loved one. After, he continued that the demon has no right to play with them. Liz hesitated a little, not knowing what to answer, and Elaine had already picked up the map. He had just recognized the place where they needed to go. Some time had passed since those events. The travelers had already boarded the cart and set off. Beatrice sighed heavily and closed her eyes. She decided to start a conversation about yesterday's event. Beatrice reprimanded Elaine. The guy flinched a little, but not so much from surprise, but from Liz's scream about the reprimand. It was as if he was calming her down with jokes that he was afraid, although in fact this was not so. Liz yelled at the guy. Why did he tell Beatrice everything? Did he really want to get a reprimand from her so much? And asked if he was a masochist who liked being punished. Elaine asked her again about the masochist, and Beatrice just sighed. Beatrice tells them both that she is also to blame for this, because she was too naive at that moment. Because the village was so quiet, calm, and peaceful, the girl justified herself by saying that she could not understand what was happening. She says that she put Liz in danger because she thinks she is the only one who needs to be scolded. Beatrice addressed these words to the princess. In response to this statement, Liz again began to say that it was her fault because it was she who went after her uncle, and on her own. Beatrice only sighed heavily at these words, and Liz continued to tell her friend that she was completely innocent of anything. Alan, at this moment, tried to remain silent and did not interfere in their conversation. He silently looked at the stone in his hand. The boy found it at the head of the village. Looking at the object more and more carefully, Elaine apparently concluded that it was a crystal. The more he looked at it, the clearer the situation became. His gaze was as if in a fog. Alfred, who could at least for a moment return to his former appearance because he had a head on his shoulders, and at the same time a general who had been deprived of his head. Having understood this important fact, Elaine began to slowly understand what was really going on here. Elaine thought that in this case, unfortunately, they could not have a quiet life. Then, Liz's voice brought him out of his thoughts. The girl was holding a powder compact in her hands. She had received an important message. Someone on the other side was calling her Mrs. Liz. But the connection was weak and quiet. Through all this crowd, Elaine noticed Nadia, a girl with ears and a tail like a dog. The girl also noticed him and called out Mr. Elaine. Holding a huge stack of papers in her hands, she became very nervous and apologized to the guy, as she was very busy at the moment. It's a nice sunny day outside, and a cool breeze is blowing. The guys decided to make a stop. Anyway, they'll have to travel about 7 days to get to the village. There was silence in the carriage. Beatrice and Elaine waited to hear news of what had happened. Liz's face changed and she could not believe what she had just heard. Beatrice asked Liz what happened. Did something happen in the royal capital? But before giving them an answer, Liz was silent for a moment. She turned to face her friends and said that a general had appeared in the capital. This news could not help but shock, and meanwhile, the weather was clear and sunny. Next, the action began to take place in the capital of Claudia. At that moment, the weather in the capital was also clear, but no one paid due attention to it. People gathered in crowds and discussed something among themselves. Each one whispered in the ear of another whether he had heard the news or not. Another was already discussing whether they had been deceived all this time. Here, on the cold white tiles, a man dressed in knight's armor began to walk towards the people. He heard how the people continued to discuss the news and whispered that the general himself had told them this. One of the townspeople continued to talk about how the general had served his king faithfully and truly, and they immediately hissed at him to shut up. Mr. Edward himself came out to them, dressed in dark colors and a black cloak. Edward Godo, that was his name, a knight, commander of the first rank. Edward noted that the city, as always, was filled with rumors and a smile could not leave his face. The guy in the white cloak who was walking behind him reported to Edward that since yesterday there had only been more of them, and no matter how you look at it, rumors in the capital were spreading with lightning speed. The young man asked him what Edward thought, whether someone was deliberately inciting the crowd to spread rumors or not. Edward asked, "What about the general?" The boy answered that they were looking for him, and according to their information, they were not lying. While Alan was talking to Beatrice about how long the trip would be, Liz was stroking the head of the snow-white horse and thinking about something of her own. However, Edward Godo shared his thoughts with him, that he considered the general to be a long-dead person on this earth. The guy looked at him silently, not daring to say a word. And what's more, Edward knows very well how the general treated this kingdom. His gaze seemed to be full of hatred for this man. Edward told his aide-de-camp that he was not the man about whom bad rumors should be spread. In this case, he thought it reasonable to believe that he was a different man entirely. The young man thinks that they will have to change their strategy for distributing information. Edward only grinned at this suggestion, and, propping his chin in his hand, called his adjutant a genius with a smile on his face. The young man blushed at these words and objected that it was simply his job. The knight was not against it because, be that as it may, his goal was to protect his people. The young man adjusted his glasses and agreed with him, because Edward knew that the general was able to subjugate any soldier and could do it with any person. If the general had truly betrayed the kingdom, he could turn even a small army into first-class soldiers. Therefore, only Edward could stand against him. The man said that no matter what, he would stop anyone who tried to harm the kingdom. He placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, and what's more important, he's never fought against him. So, this is a chance to find out who is the strongest in the kingdom. The adjutant recalled the information he knew. Edward's ability is absolute. It allows him to turn off other abilities, so they have no choice but to cross swords. Suddenly, one of the soldiers shouted loudly, "Commander!" The young man tensed up. He had a bad feeling. The girl got the guy's attention by asking him to listen to what she had to say. She felt better that he was going with them. But did he have time for that? Elaine said that everything was fine. He had been doing too many assignments lately, and he didn't have enough money to pay for housing. Edward asked what had happened, to which the subordinate stood up straight and began his report. Information had come from the security service. They had found a suspicious group of people. The man asked if he was with them now, to which the subordinate replied that he was not. He was somewhere else. Edward asked him what he meant, but nevertheless asked to be taken to him. The subordinate agreed. Already in the big castle, all three of them went down the dark corridors lower and lower. The place did not emit any light, which made it gloomy. Finally completing that route, they came across a small group of hooded men. Edward said he had never thought that suspicious characters would come so close to the royal castle. Edward said that he understood that he had been called because escorting these gentlemen was not an easy task, and asked if that was so. One of the group agreed with him, because it could cause him a lot of inconvenience. So they decided to meet him in such a place. The young man was taken aback, as was Edward himself. This voice was familiar to him. Its owner turned out to be the Archbishop himself. The men asked him to be a little gentler, because it sounded quite creepy. He said that he shouldn't look at an old man like that. Edward was slightly taken aback by the Archbishop's appearance. He said that he was not to be trifled with and asked why he had called him. The Archbishop replied that he had something that only Edward should know. The old man wanted him to accompany him. Edward understood his request, and turning to his adjutant, he ordered him to return to his place. The young man called him captain, and replied that in any case, he would accompany him wherever he went. Edward tried to calm him down, saying that he wasn't going to fight alone. So, first of all, the most important thing now was to gather all the necessary information. The boy climbed up to the top of the wagon and settled in. There were no demons yet, so now is a good time to relax a little. Beatrice asked Liz if they should leave now or not. The boy shouted at him to let him do something, but Edward let him finish. He asked the boy not to worry about it and just go back to his place. The man asked him to look after the others. At that, Edward left the adjutant alone, and he himself went with the Archbishop and his men in an unknown direction. Meanwhile, in one of the beautiful buildings in the center of the capital of Claudia, one of the servants addressed Brad, calling him sir. The young man turned to face him, adjusting his clothes. An unknown person in a cloak and hood reports the situation to him. As he says, it seems that they have managed to lure the knight, the commander of the first rank, Edward, into a trap. Brad immediately turned his back on him, saying that he had even used the Archbishop in his plan, so if nothing worked out, there would be big problems. As Brad himself thought, Edward was something uncontrollable. General Kirill's gift is unremarkable, but it's pretty good against Edward, since you can easily exchange the other side's gifts within a radius of 1 meter. That is, the magic of destruction and interference. Summing up, Brad realized that Edward was almost impossible to defeat on the battlefield. This guy is very annoying. If they can't do anything, then that person will definitely be able to come up with something. The stranger agreed with Brad. However, this is too hasty action. If things happen unexpectedly, one after another, it is not so surprising if it all collapses. Another faceless man entered the room and also addressed Brad as Lord. He said that someone had appeared, some hero they had been waiting for. A grin played on the guy's face. In the middle of a large area stood a short guy with short hair and a cloak that was neatly folded on him. Next to him stood a little girl who pressed herself closer and closer to him. There was a crowd of unknown people standing next to them. The guy wondered if they had missed the champion's arrival time and admitted that it was quite noisy here. The mountains and forests were visible from the carriage they were riding in. While Beatrice decided to close her eyes and take a nap, Liz kept her eyes fixed on the sleeping Elaine, resting above. He grabbed the girl by the shoulder with his free hand and told her not to leave him, otherwise she could get lost in this crowd. The girl only hugged the guy tighter, not by the arm, but by the waist. At first, he was taken aback by such pressure. If things happen unexpectedly, one after another, it is not so surprising if it all collapses. That is exactly what Mr. Brad said. He took the girl's hand again and told her to be a little braver. When she calmed down, he would be able to find a place where she could live in peace. He was sure of it, and gave her hope with his bright smile. The girl lowered her head slightly and smiled sweetly, following him. And so, they reached the main gates of the capital. Stopping, the guy said that this was just the right place. He turned back and asked how long the Faceless would play hide-and-seek with him. The guy was serious. He said it was impossible not to notice such a wild desire on their part to end someone's life. And they didn't really think they could do it to him. All the Trojans stood in a triangle around him and surrounded him. One of them haughtily pretended to think about it and then said that it was true. They were sure they would not be able to defeat him. The guy covered the girl standing next to him with his hand and asked if they were aiming at her. The girl seemed unable to say a word. She was scared. At this, the Faceless one laughed loudly and suggested that the guy must have completely misunderstood something. Behind him, the boy heard loud screams and sobs. Turning around, his eyes were full of horror from what he saw. The girl who stood next to him covered her ears with her hands, trying to stop the growing pain that was rolling in with renewed force. He leaned towards her and exclaimed what was going on and what was going on. The girl continued to ignore anyone and anything. She was just in pain. The Faceless one laughed at them and confessed to him that they had applied their special technique to this child. This technique is called self-destruction for life support. While she fell to her knees, still in pain, the guy sat down next to her and hugged her tightly, pressing this unfortunate girl to his chest. Suddenly, the girl noticed a bird's wing. Looking somewhere into the distance, a guy's hand appeared next to her face, on which a bird was sitting. The guy narrowed his eyes, calling these people a very bad word, and then, momentarily losing his vigilance, the girl broke free from his strong arms. However, the guy again hugged the now loudly crying girl and pressed her to himself tighter and tighter. All it took for the faceless one to do was snap his fingers, and everything that was in the place where the two civilians were sitting hugging was completely on fire. Edward turned around abruptly. The men looked very tense. The Archbishop asked him what had happened and what had caught his attention. The man said nothing. It's just that, as Edward himself tries to justify himself, he heard the sounds of an explosion, and no matter what, if something happens, his subordinates will go in that direction. Finally, their small group reached the appointed place, and then the Archbishop himself said that his role was now over. Edward looked around. He was brought to the training area. It was simply incredible in size. He asked who could have called him here, but the Archbishop told him that he would understand everything himself in a little while. Edward wanted to object, but the man turned to him first and answered that he was a busy man, so he asked for forgiveness. Then the old man walks past Edward, barely touching his shoulder, and walks out the gates of the training area. Edward is left alone. The man could only guess who could have called him here. He walked measuredly around the arena, still lost in his thoughts. Edward looked high into the sky and seemed to admire its beauty. Suddenly, a figure appeared behind the man. He felt this presence from behind and immediately turned to its source. Abruptly, their swords clashed together. Craig, Brad, and Elaine's father, attacked Edward first. Edward moved away from him to a safer distance and told him that the blow was not bad, but his wild desire to finish the night gave him away, which made Edward smile. Elaine said that the birds here were quite friendly and gave it to the girl. Liz stuck her head out of the cart, calling the bird cute, but was immediately reprimanded by Beatrice not to stick her head out of the cart so much. Craig was glaring at him, showing all his displeasure at being so close to him. Edward didn't seem at all surprised by his appearance, as it was in his repertoire to enter a fight without greeting. Be that as it may, Edward noted that they had not seen each other for a long time, ever since the time when they had to part forever with Craig's wife. Getting to the heart of the matter, Edward asked what he was really after. After all, he had even brought in the Archbishop to get him here. He supposed there must be a good reason for it. Edward noted that since the Archbishop had left them, it meant Craig had come to him alone. He called him a fool, but there was silence in response. And then Craig raised his head and said with a grin that the Archbishop was now theirs from head to toe. The man didn't understand what he meant or what he was planning. But in response, he only received a sharp blow with a sword and a crazy face of his opponent. Craig said that he called him in order to get rid of the annoying obstacle in his face. Edward was amazed. Meanwhile, people gathered at the main square. It was quite noisy there, and no one understood what was about to happen. One of the knights came out onto the balcony and smiled at them. The hubbub grew louder because everyone noticed behind him His Holiness the Archbishop. They wondered what he was doing right in the center of the city. They couldn't believe their eyes, because that knight was General Kirill himself. People kept talking, guessing why he hadn't been seen lately. Another said he'd heard he was busy. Everyone looked at them in amazement. The Archbishop addressed them as gentlemen, and first of all, he wanted to ask forgiveness for his sudden appearance. But still, there was a reason they had gathered here so suddenly. He suggested that the people might know what he was about to tell them. Their country was deceiving its citizens. Liz asked the guy how he liked the views of nature here. The guy propped his head up with his hand and thought. The old man raised his hand and said with all confidence that these were not entirely accurate words, because it was not the country that was deceiving them, but the gods themselves. The hall fell silent. The Archbishop told them that there was a reason why he had not told them about this until today. After all, the gods themselves were involved, so he did not know what might happen to the people if he told them. The Archbishop bowed his head and repented, feeling guilty since, in essence, it made no difference whether God or the country was silent. General Kirill also admitted that he was there, but he could not say it out loud, because he knew it was very cruel to them. There was a noise among the people again. What does all this mean? How could this happen? And what does cruel even mean? Perhaps it would be better not to listen to this. But as the general and the Archbishop said, there is a commotion among the people again. The general closed his eyes and said that, whatever the case, He was not forcing anyone, and then decided to continue. The general turned to the archbishop with the question of why the country itself, God, they themselves were deceiving each other. The old man bowed his head slightly and said that the reason for this was the gift itself, since the gift is what the gods can use to control them. At the same time, while the citizens were talking, a fight was in full swing in the training arena. No one wanted to give in to the other, but Craig still struck across Edward, causing the man to fall to the ground. Craig asked him if there was not a drop of doubt in his eyes about the outcome of the battle. Edward tried not to pay attention and tried to get up again. The man didn't understand what kind of power this was. The power of the gift should be completely nullified. But he realized that Craig had used a level up. He told her to look out for a bit, which she agreed to. Then he pulled her by the hand and pulled her up. Beatrice screamed, asking where Lisa was going, but by then she and Alain were already sitting on top of the cart. The man was pleased that he finally understood everything. People like them value only the gift, but the level is also important. Raising the level means getting ready to raise the rank of your soul and become closer to God. Edward asked him again about the words closer to God. Edward asked him again about the words closer to God. Craig was incredibly proud. Knowing the true meaning of the level is inconvenient for the god of the country, the ruler. After all, the level is the power that can destroy God. Edward understood his plan and called him simply a madman. Craig wants to erase the gift, because if it is defective, it can only serve as shackles. He laughed at his own words, agreeing that he was indeed a madman on Edward's part. And it all started from that very day, since the moment the person dearest to him was taken from his life. He claimed it was God who did it, but Edward said she had a weak body from birth. He shouted at him that Craig had married her because of this gift and he had understood it from the very beginning. The man said confidently that he did not need a child. Even back then, when Craig was young and she stood next to him, he remembered those moments when he asked her to be next to him. At that moment, he is torn from his memories by the sharp clash of swords against each other. He wants to finish the job, since it was his destiny to be born with this gift. Craig burst into a scream. Did Edward really consider the gift a blessing? Craig was furious. He believed that being born with such a gift meant being useless for the rest of his days. He screamed at Edward that his wife had left this world in vain and that the gift was playing with life. Returning to the conversation in the square, the general spread his arms and explained the meaning of the gift itself and that this is the truth of their world. The archbishop said that they were all God's slaves and they had all become puppets because of the gift. But he wanted to turn them to the truth. The guy asked her how she felt here. The girl was pleasantly surprised by the light breeze and the sky seemed even more beautiful to her. Beatrice only sighed quietly, realizing that she could not do anything. The general came out to the people and asked them to make a choice not only for themselves, but also for their future children and descendants. People again whispered that the gift still had power, and there were those who would refuse for a reward, because the defense of the country uses the power of the gift. Archbishop interrupted hubbub people, saying that answers on all their doubts already there are. To them came out Brad Westfield. The guy said that he saw how busy the girl was now and understood everything perfectly. And the crowd of different creatures at that time continued to go about their own business. The guy said that if they hadn't gone on this trip, they might never have seen such beauty. The girl tried to remain silent, trying to capture such moments. She raised her eyes to Leon and, turning to him, said that she was counting on his help this time too. The guy responded with a counter request, and that was the end of their conversation. Later, they decided to make a stop. Leaving the cart, Alain lit a fire and picked tomatoes growing there, while the girls took a bath. Liz smiled happily, noting that this hot spring was simply wonderful, and Beatrice fully supported her. This spring appeared thanks to Alain. Liz says that they always help her out, and that makes her look sad. Beatrice assures her that she and Alain decided to be there for her in the first place, so she shouldn't worry. But Liz still wants to be useful to Alain too. When Liz lived in the royal capital, she could not even imagine that they would take a bath together like this. Beatrice agreed with her. While Alain held the pot and took care of all the chores and duties, the girls got dressed, and Liz thanked the guy, saying that they really liked it. The guy was glad to hear it. He was preparing dinner for the girls, and unfortunately he didn't have time, so he needs a little more time. He asks them to wait a little, but Liz interrupts him. The girl offers her help, which makes Alan and Beatrice go into shock. Beatrice was categorically against such an idea. She said that Liz could get hurt and then it would be very difficult for her. The girl tries to argue with her, saying that she's not that clumsy, but as Beatrice says, that is not the point. Elaine thinks that Liz clearly lacks persuasiveness. The girl burst into tears and confessed to him that she would really like the guy to help her at least a little, but to this request, Alan only objected that he would hardly be able to help her with this. However, the boy said that he could use some help. Beatrice wanted to object to him, but she was not allowed to finish. Alan asked her to look after the saucepan for now. Under the girl's heavy sigh, Alan led Liz a little further so that they could chop the vegetables first. The guy shows her how to hold the knife correctly and asks her to try to do it herself. The girl readily agrees, following his instructions. A little time passed, and finally all the vegetables were peeled. The girl was a little confused because she didn't do it very well. The guy told her that there was nothing to worry about because she would get it done in time. The rest of the evening the guys spent in each other's pleasant company. They had a hearty dinner, sat by the warming fire, and plotted the route on the map, watching the stars in the sky. With all this talk and pleasant atmosphere, Liz fell asleep, resting her head on Elaine's shoulder. Beatrice pointed out to the boy that the girl had fallen asleep and picked her up to carry her to the cart. She thanked Alain for today, but the boy didn't quite understand it. Beatrice admitted that Liz really wanted to be at least a little useful to the guy. He didn't seem to expect to hear that. The girl admitted that she saw how happy Liz was when she was assigned cooking duties. The guy supported her in this, completely agreeing. He said that his dream was finally slowly coming true. Beatrice does not understand what he means by this phrase. Alan wanted a life filled with calm and peace. He said all this while looking at the starry sky, and Beatrice continued to stand there, not understanding the essence of the matter. The action takes place in Alan's distant past. A large palace with incredible marble statues is visible all around. The weather outside was pleasant and warm. Nadia was taken aback and said that, in fact, they were so busy precisely because of him. The guy silently continued to stare at the girl, not fully understanding what exactly the problem was. Alan watched with his younger brother as red rose petals scattered in their mother's hands. The time when she was placed in an incredible pile of different flowers also flew by rather unnoticed. Brad looked at his feet, not fully realizing what had just happened. He raised his big eyes to Alain. He called him brother and asked why their mother had fallen asleep. With a face that seemed devoid of any emotion, Alain answered his younger brother that their mother was no longer there, as she had now fallen asleep forever. There were different people in black dresses and suits walking around. Brad asked why this happened. Alain answered that people have such a property as ending their lives, sooner or later. While Alain stood silently, head down, Brad was crying, unable to do anything. The brothers held each other's hands. Already walking along the large corridor, further from the place of the farewell ceremony, the boys carefully opened one of the rooms. Wiping away his tears, Brad saw the silhouette of his father in front of another huge room. He was standing in proud solitude, far away from all the guests and his children. Hot, salty tears were running down the man's cheeks, which he was apparently trying to hide from prying eyes. The boys locked the room, not daring to disturb their father. While Brad was shaking with fear, still shedding tears, Alain, his older brother, began to gently stroke his head, trying to somehow calm him down. Time passed. The man laughed loudly and called Alain a real genius. He was definitely happy, proud that he was his son. An unknown girl, who also witnessed everything that happened there, praised the results of Mr. Alain. Brad watched all this, not daring to interrupt their conversations. The guy told her that he only asked her to sell his materials and clean up the monster whose life he had ended. This made the girl's head hurt even more, and that was the problem. A little later, the boy went to the shore near the sea. He carefully sat down on the hot sand, and on the shore, he was able to find a huge stone, which really attracted his attention. The boy joyfully ran to his brother, literally bursting into the room. He began to tell him with a smile that he had found a very beautiful stone. But as soon as he opened his eyes, the image of his father appeared before him, who was very displeased. The man, with disgust and coldness in his words, to his youngest son, said that Alain now has absolutely no time for his stupid entertainment. He said with all severity in his voice not to disturb him anymore. The boy apologized to his father with trembling lips, and beads of sweat began to flow down his face. The man made it clear to him that he should not even think about distracting him with any pranks anymore. He turned his back to Brad, not even wanting to look at him. Opening the door to the room, he treated him very rudely, calling him not a son but a mistake of nature. At that moment, the boy's eyes expressed a feeling of emptiness and rejection. The stone fell out of Brad's hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud, and he ran away from there, leaving the stone lying where it fell. Later that same evening, when night had fallen and the corridor was filled with darkness, someone knocked quietly on Elaine's door, where he was sitting doing his homework with a stack of books on his desk, and someone entered his room. The one who did it was his younger brother. He was holding his pillow in his hands very timidly and looked down. Elaine asked his brother what had happened. He wondered if the boy couldn't sleep now, and that's why he came to him. Brad very carefully placed the pillow on his older brother's bed. He addressed him as a brother and asked what is called a mistake of nature. The guy was a little taken aback by such a question. He wondered why he would ask that. Brad asked a new question, whether these words were about him. If these were ordinary materials, then everything would be fine, but they turned out to be incredibly rare. Because in 300 years of her work in the guild, she had never seen such things. Alan assured him that of course this was not the case, and in general, as the guy said, if a stranger said something like that, then he should not be listened to at all, and his words should not be taken seriously. Brad told his brother that he was lying, but the boy denies that he never lied to him. The boy tries again to tell him that he actually lied, because his father himself, his dear person, said that Brad was just a mistake of nature. Large tears are running down the boy's cheeks again, streaming down his cheeks, and his voice is shaking incredibly. The boy grabbed his pillow, with which he came to his brother and loudly declared to him that his brother was also a liar, like his father. Elaine shouted his name and was about to stop him, but still did not follow him. The next day, Elaine continued to study diligently under the supervision of his nannies. The boy was already quite tired, but continued to write without stopping. The father praised his eldest son in every way, clearly placing great hopes on him. The teachers also reported to him about the boy's successes. Brad, who was standing in the hallway of his house, heard the maids talking about himself. They said that all he did was have fun. Hearing this about himself, the boy froze in place, trying not to even breathe loudly. They smoothly moved on to talking about Elaine, saying that he was simply a wonderful boy and that he would be able to become a worthy heir to this house. The boys were sitting not too far from the water. Brad was hugging his knees with his arms and holding them as close to him as possible. At this time, Alan was talking to him. The boy was trying to understand what had happened to him and why he was sitting here all alone. Alain gently extended his hand to his younger brother so that he could stand up. He said that it would soon be dark and they needed to go home now. But Brad immediately pushed his hand away, not wanting to accept his help. She hasn't been able to estimate their value yet, so she can't pay Elaine yet. The girl assumes that the calculations could take about a month. The guy was upset by such news. Brad ran away from there immediately, and as far as possible, shedding tears, and Elaine silently looked after him, and did not understand what was happening to his younger brother. Time passed. Elaine continued to be called a genius, and his status in the family did not change. However, later on, a radical change occurred for Brad. The boy's father thought for a moment and rubbed his beard. He was extremely impressed that Brad had begun to surpass his brother. He praised him, calling him his son now. Brad realized that his father had suddenly decided to acknowledge him, even though he knew perfectly well that his brother was much smarter than he was. Brad felt that their father's kindness was just a pretense, but still, after so many conversations about him, the boy liked this praise incredibly. It was on that very day that it was no longer Brad who was called a mistake of nature, but his older brother, Elaine. At that moment, the father began to vent all his anger on his son. He shouted at him, "Is the boy really not so hurt to hear how he is now called a mistake of nature?" To this statement, he could not answer his father. Brad was yelling at his brother. Even though his father was telling him that he was better than Alan now, he knew perfectly well that his older brother's status was higher than his. He told Alan that he knew it himself. The guy clenched his fist, trying to get through to him that it was important for them to always raise the status. Alan silently looked into his brother's eyes. On his face there was only a mask of sadness. He did not answer him at all, which infuriated Brad. He started yelling even more. claiming that his older brother wasn't taking him seriously. Alain tried to argue that this was absolutely not true, but was immediately told by his younger brother that he was as much of a liar as their father. The guy is sure that Alain is constantly making fun of him, grinning funny, just like his father. No matter how many times they called Alain names, he continued not to react to all these words, which infuriated Brad even more. Brad clenched his teeth, not understanding why this was happening. He had suffered so much and rushed away from all of this. He carefully raised his eyes to Alain, trying to hold back his tears. Brad Westfelt walks out to the crowd of people standing near the castle. The crowd begins to whisper among themselves, discussing what is happening. This is a creature that will be more likely to help them. As he expected, the combat power is comparable to a knight from the Order, and Brad can confirm this, that other countries won't be able to even come close to copying this recipe. But the man who just arrived says that still doesn't sound convincing, because this monster, standing behind Brad, tried to kill the princess. What he heard alarms Westfelt, and the people in the crowd don't understand if he's really talking about Princess Liz. Brad isn't too happy about this topic and asks what he's going to gain from all this. And he asks the guy not to talk nonsense, but suddenly from afar he hears the voice of a girl asking him to stop. It was the voice of Mistress Liz herself. She removes the hood of her cloak, confirming her identity, allowing the common people to see it, and thus causing shock to everyone present. And then she repeats her words about them stopping this. But the people standing in the crowd can't stop being amazed that standing in front of them is none other than Princess Liz. And then they think out loud, not fully understanding whether the general and the archbishop are really planning a coup, since they were planning an assassination. But their train of thought is interrupted by the lady, who says that she asks them to stop their discussion, since she has an innate gift. The girl continues and says that for these creatures and for demons, strong possessors of the gift are a hindrance. And the one who attacked her was the demon standing in front of her, the same black creature standing behind Brad. Although it can also be used as a national defense force, at that time other countries will not attack their country, which cannot but please him. Then he asks the people if it is not wonderful if the war does not happen. As the general said before, it should not cause them any problems. And to prove her point, Liz points her finger at him. Westfelt realizes that this is not what he was expecting, and this starts to anger him. Then after all, he just starts laughing loudly, causing fear in everyone present, as well as conflicting feelings because of his behavior. And yet he says that he wanted to take everything peacefully, but it seems that he tried in vain and pretended. People cannot believe what he just said, because they tried to believe him, and they realize that he himself has just confessed to this, which means that he is guilty. Then suddenly the knights appear, which surprises the inhabitants of the state. A little boy runs up to one of them and tells them that something bad has happened, and asks for their help because they can't cope without them. But the boy only notices his strange behavior and does not understand what is wrong with the knight. But he simply raises his sword and is about to attack the defenseless boy, who cannot even fight back. But the young man who just entered does not allow him to do this, saving the boy's life using his spell, thanks to which he simply falls to the ground, and this shocks the little boy as well as Liz, who covers her mouth with her hand in shock after seeing it. The princess does not understand why all the knights fell and what is happening to them. Then she turns to Alain and asks if this is his doing. The guy confirms her suspicions and says that he simply broke the strings that controlled them, and there is nothing surprising about this. But the alchemist, who is incapable of anything, learned to create something, and this is his power. And with the hero's puppets, this will become possible. After all, they were most likely under someone's control, and he hopes that there will be no consequences after this. The demon goes crazy after what happened, and there are many corpses lying on the ground. Alain notes that they were also most likely under someone's control, and Liz still can't get over her shock. Then Brad slowly approaches them and asks, turning to Alain, what he did to them, calling it defective trash and getting angry. He completely loses his mind and threatens Alain to stay out of his way. At the same time, the demon behind him also slowly begins to go crazy, and the people who see what is happening begin to panic and run in different directions. The princess tries to calm everyone down so that all the residents do not panic again, and then asks them all to leave this place immediately. Alain just takes a deep breath and says, turning to Brad, that he is the only one with problems here, and maybe the reason is that he couldn't stand up for himself. Brad comes closer to him and Elaine doesn't miss the opportunity to hit him in the face, which causes him to end up on the ground. Alan looks into the distance, or rather, he looks at the silhouette of a demon emerging from the fog. This frightens the citizens of the state even more, and they do not understand what is happening now and what they need to do in this situation. But they are trying to calm them down, saying that everything is fine and nothing bad is happening. The Archbishop joins the conversation and says that the hero's puppets are a power that can unlock the hidden potential of another person. Liz asks to leave people with her so that the guy can continue what he started. But Elena is a little embarrassed by this and still grateful to the girl for this. And then he asks the princess not to make such a worried look on her face, and then assures her that everything will be fine with him, and she should have no reason to worry. Meanwhile, the hero and the captain fight Craig. The girl, breathing heavily, lowers the sword to the ground, unable to hold it in her hands any longer. General Kirill is behind the girl, still sitting motionless on the ground. The hero is surprised and notes that her opponent is quite strong and quite difficult to deal with. And then he wonders if Craig's movements are weird because it looks like he knows all their actions in advance, which is pretty weird. The general tells her that his gift is clairvoyance, and with its help he looks into the future. But this gift requires great concentration, and is not so easy to use in battle. Therefore, General Carroll, turning to Craig, asks him to give him this power, because she would not want him to do something like that. But the man only answers that the gift showed him her death again and again, and he continued to show it for a long time. Then he starts shouting and says that the general doesn't know what he's talking about, and if he avoids the future, it may change. But no matter what he does, her death is the only thing that will never change and will remain eternal. And he can do nothing about it, because from the realization of these things, he cannot hold back his tears and covers his face with his hands. Brad confirms the words of the Archbishop and says that it will not be possible to immediately reveal all the abilities, and it will take time. But if the power is used without having the gift, then stronger abilities may appear than now. For example, the abilities of an alchemist awakened in him, at the same time saying that was he really so desperate that he decided that she had to die. After all, her life was taken because of the gift, and all because it was a fate predetermined by God. Like the gift and many other things, God is just a relic of the past, invented by people. But the general and the hero are shocked, because they understand that Craig is not himself and is talking complete nonsense. But in the end, the girl can't stand it and says that if you think about it that way, then by denying God, he is also denying his own power. That is, his gift. Craig explains to her that he simply cannot forgive himself for losing the person closest to him. But in response to this, the girl says that this is just nonsense, invented by him. These words do not calm the man down at all, and yet he agrees with her, saying that he probably thinks about it too much. Then he turns to the captain and the girl. But this alarms the general, and he raises his hand up. While casting a spell asking for power in exchange for life, a cut appears on his wrist, and blood begins to flow from it. The girl gathered all her remaining strength into a fist and ran towards Craig, trying to stop him from his subsequent actions. But the man only says that this place should be burned to the ground. And so the forces of the two opponents merge together and a barrier is formed between them, preventing the other from breaking through. And the awakening of the ability is what ultimately awaits a person in the future. The gift has a difference. It is possible to pass it on to the next generation and so, gradually passing on the ability from generation to generation. In the end, they will be able to pass on to their descendants a power many times greater than the gift. The girl understands that she cannot cope with this power, and a satisfied Craig gives the order and says that his power should absorb her right hand. This scares the girl, and a moment later she finds herself unconscious against the wall with a bunch of wounds on her body. The general prevents her from falling to the ground and catches her in time, realizing that Craig's strength has become comparable to that of the devil. The captain tries to stop the man and asks him to stop doing this, because if he continues to use this power, he will cease to be himself. But Craig, completely out of his mind, does not understand what is so terrible about this. Then, with the last of his strength, General Kirill raises his sword in his hands to fight him back, but he was unable to even touch it. Before Craig's power takes over his body, the girl worries about the captain, calling him uncle. But the man does not answer her because he cannot say a word. Now this terrifying thought reaches him, that he is being completely consumed by darkness. And being in this darkness, he understands all of Craig's feelings, his anger, sadness, and crying. And from helplessness, he simply falls to the ground. His life is drawn to a close, and yet, in the end, he finds the strength to tell Craig that it must have been very painful for him to experience all this alone. If it's true, then it's good, because the gift does not decide the outcome of life. But what will they do after Brad's death and how to survive? Although it is true that there are many things that can only be dealt with the help of the gift, but these words only provoke the man more, and he deals a fatal blow to General Kirill, from which he dies, and now his lifeless body lies on the ground. The girl can't stand it and starts calling her uncle even louder, but he doesn't answer, and Craig, completely mad, declares that no one will ever be able to understand what was in his heart and what he felt all this time. But the girl tries to reason with him, telling him not to say such stupid things, because the general tried to save him until the very end, and then asks if he understands it. But the man just starts laughing loudly after hearing it and asks if it makes any difference. After all, with the help of his gift, he saw that the hero would die the following spring, and this news took the girl by surprise. Then Craig says that this event, or rather the girl's death, should not be postponed. He stretches out his palm to her, and a strange black smoke wraps around his entire hand and then surrounds the hero's entire body. The girl sits on the floor, unable to even move, and because of this, she cannot protect herself in any way. And then pieces of memories flash through her head, where she too could not do anything about the impending danger that was a threat to her life. But suddenly someone covers her with their body, appearing at the most necessary moment and thereby saving the girl's life. As soon as he turns to face her, the hero realizes that it is Elaine, and her face breaks into a smile, and she says that he has finally come to her, and the guy asks her for forgiveness for being late. Craig also sees Elaine, and this only makes him laugh. That's why these people are here, to whom Brad points with his hand. He asks them to quickly show themselves to the common people. He says he didn't think the guy would be able to get here, then asks him to stay out of his way and calls him a loser. The guy doesn't react to this at all and says that he has similar feelings to Craig because he would also like someone else to be in his place. The man answers him sarcastically, so that in that case he should get out of here. But to this, Alain only draws his sword, ready to fight Craig at any moment. His determination only makes the man laugh, and he says that he understood everything and it's good that he came here and it doesn't matter how he did it. But he only says one word to him, so that he dies faster and squeezes his hand tighter into a fist. But Alain calmly dodges this attack. Craig is shocked and confused. He can't believe what he saw. The guy turns to the man and says that he is sorry that his father, that is, Craig, says something like that to him. And it is not for nothing that everyone around says that you can't choose your parents. But the hatred in Craig's heart is not that weak, and he calls his son bad and asks, turning to Alain, who he is anyway. But the guy only answers him with a grin that he himself knows perfectly well who he is, because he himself named him. He repeats to his father what he said earlier, that he called Alain a loser. But Craig gets even more furious about this and asks him if he really doesn't understand anything, or if he's just pretending. The guy says that even though he is a loser, there are people who can't accept that. Then he continues the conversation, but in Craig's head, these words seem to be blocked. Alain finally says that he feels sorry for his mother, and then the man can no longer stand it and starts screaming, telling him not to even dare to say her name in his presence. The girl, who had been watching him from the side all this time, noticed that Craig's power had gone crazy and could not be returned. Alain reminds the girl to take better care of herself in such a situation, and the man, pronouncing some spells, directs all his strength and power towards the guy and the girl. After the creature removes its cloak, all that everyone can notice is complete darkness instead of a body and white eyes that stand out against the rest of the body. The people standing in the crowd are horrified by what they see and begin to scream that the person standing in front of them is none other than a demon. Alain says to Craig that he will continue to do this, at least until he understands the magnitude of his crime. The girl tries to call out to the guy so that he gets out of harm's way, but Alain doesn't listen to her and takes it completely on himself. And then everything, as if in a fog, he slowly sinks to the bottom of the river. Opening his eyes, his mind continues to work, and he realizes that he is most likely in water, and the place itself is an abyss of despair. All the memories rush through his head like a whirlwind. Painful memories of losing a mother, and where a father and son bitterly mourn the death of their mother and wife. But then Elaine realizes that he never noticed it. Then he is transported into a memory where his mom and dad are standing deep in the forest. Mom holds tiny Elaine in her arms, and they all look happy being together. The guy always pretended that he didn't notice any of this, and the wall between people creates longing, and in the blink of an eye, the relationship between them changes. Although Alain knew this well, there are still people in this world who believe in him, and this is, at a minimum, Princess Liz. Therefore, he cannot leave everything as it is, and, gathering all his strength into a fist, decides to fight back against his father. And with lightning speed, he rushes next to him and cuts his throat, ending up behind him. Alain looks at his father's falling, lifeless body with a serious expression on his face, but does not feel any emotions. But Brad asks everyone to remain calm and not to panic ahead of time. The girl ran up to the boy to check if he was injured. The first records of these situations appeared quite quickly, which said that a general and an archbishop were found practicing dark magic in the capital, and the commander of the knights was found dead. But the queen was able to quell the popular unrest, and the people did not reach the point of rebellion, after which major riots occurred in the Duchy of Westfort. The ruler here tried to rebel against the state using dark magic, but no matter how hard you try, you can't undo what's done. And then, they returned to their previous lives. Sometime later, in the castle, the girl who was on the battlefield with Elan was lying on the bed with her hand bandaged. Princess Liz was looking after her, and then the little girl, climbing the stairs, saw the hero and immediately ran to her. At the same time, all the knights came to the grave of their commander and honored him, and also brought him flowers in memory of his grave. Although they had lost a lot, deep scars remained on their souls, and the peaceful days continued to pass. The female knight stands next to the deputy head commander, who is unable to contain his emotions. After some time, being in the castle and standing on one knee before the king, he pronounces Elaine to them, and he says that they highly value his merits, and therefore grant him the dukedom of Westfort. Princess Liz, standing next to the guards, watches him closely. But the guy says, addressing His Highness, that with all due respect, he is forced to refuse this offer. He explains to him that he has already been disinherited, but if he accepts this land as his own, then she would immediately become very important to the kingdom. Therefore, instead of the king's gift, he would prefer to retire. And they say that this is Brad Westfelt, the same one from the Westfelt Duke family. But they don't understand. Shouldn't another gentleman become the next head? And this thought shocks them. Pointing to the creature that just took off its cloak, he says that he understands them because they know him as a demon, and also understands their fear after they saw him. Then the archbishop joins the conversation with the guy and says that this demon will not harm them, because they managed to make a contract with them and everything will be fine. Rising from his knees, he still does not stop bowing to his king, and asks him not to remember this badly. The king accepts his words, saying that so be it, and besides, he knew that it would be so. After all, he already knows Alain well. This will be his gratitude for the guy, because he defended the country and his most important treasure, his daughter. In the king's memories, the little princess happily runs to tell her father about something, and her conversation turns to Alain. She tells her father that she talked a lot with the guy, and then clarifies whether the king is really listening to her. And having made sure of this, he continues his interesting story. After everything is over, the king orders the servant to call Liz. He follows his orders without question. Meanwhile, Elaine approaches the two girls and apologizes for the wait. But the girl in the dress and with a pigtail answers him that she wasn't expecting him, because she just arrived herself. Elaine tells the girl about what happened earlier in the throne room, and she wonders how he could refuse the king's offer. And then he asks if he's really in his right mind. Elaine says it's no big deal, and asks if they should return to that city. And after all, it is quite convenient there, and it is possible to gather information from the surrounding villages. But this doesn't make the girl very happy, and she asks what they will do next. This question takes the guy by surprise, and he didn't even think about it. They can't understand how they managed to form a partnership, and it can't be true. But Brad doesn't stop and continues, saying that thanks to his partnership with them, he was able to learn about what he told them earlier. And the demon told Brad the whole truth that their country hides from its own subjects, and they gave them a promise to help with what they could not do with gifts. And he asks, turning to the common people, whether they now understand the whole situation and what position they are in now. Then he says that who knows what might happen there, and they will decide everything there. To this, the girl tells him that there is not a drop of responsibility in him. However, as always, the girl is not surprised by such behavior. It leaves Elena stupefied. He can't figure out when it happened and asks her if she thinks he's irresponsible. Then the guy suddenly starts thanking the girls for helping him this time. After all, he wouldn't have managed without them. These words really confuse the girls, and the eldest of them tells him that there's nothing special about it. And besides, she did almost nothing, only looked after Milena, and then she suddenly remembers something. And he asks, turning to Alan if everything is okay, that he didn't tell Liz anything. In his defense, the guy says that she probably has a lot of things to do and is too busy. But this answer did not satisfy the girl, and she asks if he is making fun of her now. Then from afar, someone's voice is heard calling the boys. It was Princess Liz. She runs towards them headlong. At the same time, she said that she had finally found them, because she had already begun to think that they might have left the city. The guy turns to face her and asks that she probably has a lot of things to do in the kingdom. The girl, looking out from behind Elaine, thinks to herself where the princess has been all this time. But Liz only asks Elaine if he will return to the city, because she would like to go with him. Then he asks if the service is over already. The guy replies that it is, but now he needs to return to his domain. The princess, with a happy expression on her face, declares that she even changed her name and is now Liz Westford. Everyone present stands in complete shock and does not know what to say. Then Elaine breaks this silence with her question about her actually becoming the ruler of Westford. The girl says that he understood everything correctly, and then says that, in fact, she will give real power to another person. The guy does not understand what benefit this will be for Liz, but she tells him that there will definitely be a benefit. She couldn't even think of herself as a future queen, so she didn't think for long whether it was worth it or not. And besides, it would be a new interesting experience for her. Even if they don't have the gift, it won't be a huge problem. He encourages people to join forces with all those who are different from them. Alan says that since she has already made up her mind, there is nothing to be done. The girl, confirming her words, says that there really is nothing to be done. But Elaine almost forgot and asks how Beatrice is doing. Liz says that Beatrice is a member of the guard, directly subordinate to the royal family. And since she is no longer her member, then this issue is resolved, although it will be difficult for the princess without her. The guy supports her words that it will be difficult without her, and then clarifies that they definitely don't have to wait for her. Liz says it's okay, because it's Beatrice. Elaine can't quite believe it, and to make sure, he asks if he understood correctly that she really is all alone. The princess says that everything is exactly like this, although at first she was supposed to be accompanied by several people, but she decided to go alone. This comes as a shock to the guy, and he asks Liz if she is sure about her decision. The girl says yes, because Alan will go with her. The guy stares at the princess for a few minutes, trying to accept what she said. Then he realizes that there really are still people in this world who care about him, even though he is neither a hero nor a loser. And he is none other than Elaine. All three girls are calling him to move quickly and asking why he is standing there, rooted to the spot. Liz doesn't understand why he stopped, because it's time for them to go. The guy comes to his senses and says that it's really time for them to move on. And all four of them go outside the castle. The Victor Empire, the Linqui Principality. Although this principality is located on the eastern edge, it still occupies a very important position in the empire. And the reason is that it was located on the border with other empires, especially the Kingdom of Adastella. This long history of conflicts between empires showed that if it were not for this principality, the Kingdom of Adastella would have had every chance of winning. And even now, the conflict between them continues, but no longer military, but on a more subtle level. Here is the Principality of Linquist and was on the front lines of this invisible war. The girl is sitting on the bed and reading some information in a book. Then all the pages from this book fly all over the room, straight to the servants, and he invites them to also think about the life they want for themselves. Brad finally declares that they will be free, And the girl says that she already knows all this, and even their best informants can't find out anything. This girl's name is Henrietta Lindquist, and she is the first daughter of Prince Lindquist. The servants immediately begin to collect all the scattered sheets of paper from the floor. And then he says, turning to the lady, that these papers are secrets of state importance and should not be treated with such disdain. The girl does not share his emotions and says that it is their fault, because it is they who cannot obtain information more valuable than what she holds in her hands. Turning her head towards the window and crossing one leg over the other, she says that this is understandable and that she won't achieve much by simply observing, so she needs to come up with something new. The servant asks the girl for forgiveness, asking if Henrietta had just said anything. But the girl only replies that it is nothing particularly important. Then the servant hands her a piece of paper and tells her to read it. As soon as she picked it up and began to read, something caught her attention. This piece of paper stated that the dragon had been pacified, the huge monster had been defeated, a magical attack had taken place on the capital, and that the general and archbishop were dead. The girl thinks to herself, isn't this a cursed kingdom? She turns to the servant, calling him Silas, and says that the paper she holds in her hands must be carefully hidden. The man carries out this order without question, and Henrietta continues to think and wonder who could have done this. Thoughts come to her mind that perhaps this guy and Ali's silhouette appears before her eyes. The girl thinks to herself that this is such a hassle, and then remembers, didn't he say that he just wants to live a quiet life? That's why he was reborn. Getting out of bed, Henrietta goes to the window. A slight smile appears on her face, and she says that in this case it can be done, because he is like that by himself. All the people begin to loudly and joyfully rejoice after hearing this, because it cannot but please them. At the same time, the first detachment of the order. But it is often said that this is the end of a hero who possesses great power, even after they have eliminated the threat. They face fear and misunderstanding from the people they protected, while risking their own lives for those people. But they don't want to become enemies of the people they saved. Henrietta's memories of her past life. She hung over the guy's body, her eyes filled with tears. She asked him for forgiveness, and she said that this was not why she became a hero, and she knew how mean she was acting towards him. The guy asks why she's apologizing. The girl answers that it's all just a matter of her character, and only thanks to him, they both remained alive. And if he dies, then everyone will cry, because he is the hero that everyone wants to become. The girl asks what their hero wants, and the guy's eyes close and he falls into eternal sleep. Elaine is lying on his bed. He opened his eyes after sleep, but something is bothering him. After all, he had again dreamed about his last memory of his previous life. But to himself he thinks that the hero, who in the last moments of his life asked for peace in the afterlife, and ultimately was never able to achieve this peace. He put on his clothes and walked out of his room and noticed that there was already food on the table ready to eat. One of the knights turns to the deputy chief and says that he is very pale. This makes him pause in his steps. Liz was also sitting at the table, and as soon as she saw the guy, a smile immediately appeared on her face, and she wished him good morning. As he goes down the stairs, the guy sits down at the table and also wishes the girl good morning. Liz says she tried to cook something, but she doesn't know what it tastes like. Alon asks where the other two are. The girl answers him that they apparently haven't woken up yet and suggests that he start without them. The guy immediately puts the food Liz prepared into his mouth and he likes it. But the guy is still lost in his thoughts and thinks that this shouldn't mean that past events will repeat themselves again. After all, everything is very calm now, and having received the bonus, they bought a house with it, and various assignments come from the guild. Liz had to fire many soldiers and employees in Westfeld, and now there is complete chaos there. And yet he is worried about how long this will last. But in any case, as long as he is in the kingdom, he will have to live in this turmoil. So he decided to leave the kingdom. After Elaine and Liz finish their meal, the guy notices that the girl seems ready to move on. She tells him that it goes without saying, because she can't be a burden to him. Noelle comes out of the room and wishes everyone a good morning, yawning at the same time. As soon as Liz notices her, she blushes, and all because the girl came out in her underwear. But the girl does not react to this in any way, but only explain to everyone that she sleeps like this. Elon is not surprised at all by what he saw in front of him, and only asks Noel if maybe she should get dressed. Liz still can't believe it because there is a guy in the same room with them, but the girl explains to her that he has seen worse. Liz can't believe it, and Melina at this time tried to cover her, standing behind her. The princess starts to wave it off and asks the guy to explain what is happening now because she is not making up all sorts of things in her head. The others also join in this discussion and say that they are worried about the captain, who is currently far away from them. But everything should be fine, because after all, he is their captain. Elaine explains to her that this is not what she thought, and everything was completely different. And yet, the guy asks the girl to get dressed in a coercive tone. Melina hits Noelle on the back, as if urging her on. The girl says that she understood everything and is already going to get dressed. And the guy thinks to himself that most likely Melina has already gotten used to this kind of behavior from Noelle. Then Elaine says that they should go down, eat, and then they will move out. At these words, the girl breaks into a smile and she says yes. Sometime later, the four of them are heading to the Victor Empire. Liz notes that in a little while the castle walls will be visible. The Victor Empire is a great multinational country, proud of its land and people. Relations between it and Adster are very strained, due to a long history of conflicts over territory, and the general who achieved a peaceful resolution to the last conflict is dead. But despite this, there has been no new attack from the Victor Empire. Noelle asks Liz that even though she is no longer a princess, she is still a princess, and it is okay that she left her domain and went to the Empire. Liz says that everything is correct, and even though she is a princess now, fortunately, her family does not care about her at the moment, and so now she has the opportunity to at least get out somewhere. And just recently, she received information from former servants that a number of former leaders had fled to the Empire, and Liz is determined to find them. The demons have taken advantage of the weakness of some warriors, so Beatrice is now training their troops. And even despite such a responsible mission, she allows her to leave, and then says that if Elaine were here, he would agree with her opinion. Noel adds that they are with them too. Then Liz asks why they went to the Empire. The girl explains that she had long heard that dwarves lived there and had long wanted to go to the Empire. Liz agrees with her and says that quite a lot of people live there, and besides, elves can live there too. Hearing this, the deputy head of the first detachment of the order turns to them and says that there is no need to worry about him. After all, he is also worried about the captain, but he may not appreciate such behavior so much that he should stop doing it and continue doing his job. One of the knights answers him and says that they will wait for news from the commander and believe in the best because it cannot be otherwise. Noelle says that anything is possible. Then she asks Liz if there is really a truce between Adster and Victor now. It used to be much more dangerous there. The girl says she is absolutely right, but who knows what might happen, even though there is a truce now. And maybe the demons even got here. While the girls were talking to each other, Elaine watched the road, and on their way they met demons in the form of wolves. But they were not simple. They had only a shell instead of skin and no insides. The girls also turned their attention to them, and this did not make them very happy. Liz realized that there were sandwolves in front of them. Noel asks in surprise if they are really sandwolves. The girl nods her head affirmatively. Then, he continues and says that there are many rumors that they are sand gods of death. Noel doesn't understand how these are sand gods of death. Liz explains to her that they don't have a specific form like slimes, and no matter how hard you try to hurt them, they always regenerate. But she still doesn't understand what they are doing here, and the wolves, in turn, began to growl menacingly at the people in the cart. Alan then asks the girls if they don't feel like they could be someone's pets. This question shocks all three of them, and they stand silently for a couple of seconds, not knowing what to say in response. Then Noelle asks how he can say that. The guy explains that if they refuse to be someone's pets and they kill them, then there will be no end of problems. The girl says that she has never heard of anyone taming sandwolves before, because it is very strange. But these wolves do not scare the guy at all. He takes out his sword and is ready to defend himself from them, and Liz, at this time, tries to stop him. And so, the sandwolves rush to attack the guy, but he deftly dodged them and then completely cut their bodies in half. Now they should go and check what that explosion that happened some time ago was. The deputy chief was wary after hearing this, because everything should have gone smoothly. Within moments, all the sandwolves were destroyed, leaving only black spots. Noel notices Liz's strange behavior and asks what happened to her. The girl explains that she thought she saw Alan hesitate for a second. Noel asks if she's sure she wasn't imagining things because she didn't notice anything unusual in his behavior. But Liz says that she was definitely not mistaken. And yet, she cannot understand what is happening to the guy. The Victor Empire, the capital of the county of Link-Vest-Loris. All the travelers came to the main square, and Liz is surprised by the number of people in the square, and says that there are so many of them. And Noelle looks around, wondering where she can find the dwarven workshops. But Alan also did not waste time and looked around all this time. And then he asked the girls if they don't think everyone here is a little tense. And he explains that it's not that it's about the war, it's just that everyone is worried. The girl thinks for a long time and does not understand how excited they are and still assumes that maybe it is connected with new enemies. The guy is also not sure of this, and still it seems to him that there are too many guards, although he understands that they are in the center of the city. But somehow they are watching everything too closely. And he says that if you look at it that way, it's very strange. But before he can finish speaking, he runs into a girl. He asks her for forgiveness and says that he was too distracted to see her walking ahead. Then, in front of him, he notices a man in a cloak and asks who they are, and threatens them, telling them to freeze and not move until he does something. Then he looks closely at this girl and asks if her name is Henrietta by any chance. The girl who just bumped into the guy's shoulder is also surprised and asks if his name is Alain by any chance. His companions watch them, and then Noelle asks if the guy really knows such a beauty. Alain explains that she is just an old acquaintance. However, only Liz cannot accept this fact. Then they step aside and Liz asks Henrietta if she is part of the Lindquist family. And then Henrietta asks Liz for permission to ask one question, and then asks why the princess, or more precisely, the head of the house, walks the streets alone. This question leaves the girl stunned, and for several minutes she doesn't know what to answer, and then says that it's just tourism and nothing more. Henrietta finds it hard to believe, but she still stops questioning the girl and then says that although she doesn't know why they came here, she wants to explain something to her. She tells them that they know that their kingdom has been attacked by dark magic, but she is more interested in knowing who stopped it. And she asks if it really was them, and asks them to tell her if it was their doing. And she, like Henrietta, advises them to return to their homeland. Alain thanks the girl for her advice with a smile on his face. Henrietta turns around, saying that she is leaving and sincerely asks them to leave this city as soon as possible. Noel points out that the girl just up and left, which is pretty weird, and Liz just says that maybe they should listen to her. And the guy, in turn, turned away from the girls and went his own way, saying that he would be back soon. This shocks the girls. He tells them not to worry, because they will meet again later anyway. But for now, he suggests that the three of them go for a walk. But Brad doesn't let the people standing in front of him finish their thoughts and calls out to everyone present, drawing all their attention to himself. But as soon as the deputy head came closer to their enemies, he immediately realized that they were beyond their capabilities, and it was quite dangerous for them. After some time, Alain found Henrietta and calls her by name. The girl turns to face him. The guy says that he forgot to ask something else. And Henrietta only reproaches him and says that he abandoned 3 beautiful girls and came here. But Alain doesn't react to this in any way, but only asks her why she approached them. But the girl tells him that she is the only one asking questions here, and why is he interested in this? She has her own affairs, and she does not discuss them even with him, the messenger of the gods. And yet, she says he thinks too much. And if you analyze the past life, then this is just her simple warning. The guy does not understand what kind of warning this is. She explains to him that what she told them at the end of the conversation. The guy doesn't understand. At the end of the conversation, didn't she talk about returning? And he thinks to himself, did she say anything else? But Henrietta pulls him out of his thoughts with her question, in which she asks if his friends know that he is far from weak. Then it dawns on Alain that she has understood everything. But to this, the guy tells her that she is worried about him, although this puts the girl into a stupor and makes her blush. She still says that there is nothing strange in the fact that she is worried about him. Alain notes that she was exactly the same in her past life and has not changed at all. Henrietta tells him that she also had a divine mission, which he does not understand at all. And it seems that she, as an apostle, gave him advice. And now, as a person named Henrietta, lives in this world. He doesn't know what to do in this situation and was ready to attack the enemy. But the man in the cloak explains to him that they are not going to attack them. because they simply don't need it. They stand in complete silence for a while, but the guy decides to break this silence and asks the girl why she came to this world. She cannot give a clear answer to this question and does not know how to explain it correctly. And it seems that Aline is destined to get into all sorts of troubles, and she is a kind of support group for him. These words really shock the guy, and he asks if this means that she really cares about him. But the girl reminds him that she talked about this from the very beginning. Elaine asks her for forgiveness. She continues the conversation and says that they were the ones who dealt with that attack, although there is nothing unusual about this. Therefore, she, as an apostle and as Henrietta, tells him one thing. If he wants to live in peace, then he had better go back. The boy waits a few seconds, then says that he understands everything and thanks her for everything. And the girl says after him that she hopes that the boy really understood everything. After some time, the guy walks along a narrow path and thinks that it is high time to return to his companions. But suddenly, the sound of a shot is heard. People who are nearby at that moment begin to panic. They can't believe that there was an explosion. They also can't figure out where exactly the explosion was. Some passersby start worrying if everything is okay, and some just say that they should go back quickly. And Elaine, in turn, understands that the explosion occurred on that corner, and he sincerely believes that the guys are safe. Then he notices a man behind him and calls out to him. And then he asks the deputy head to listen to their story about how this world works. And after some time, Elaine approaches a guy around the corner who's shaking and his eyes are filled with tears. He asks the stranger if he knows anything about this explosion. The man stands up and tells him not to come near him and asks him to stop. The guy doesn't understand what's going on. And then he notices a red, or to be more precise, black trace of liquid. Then the stranger takes out a weapon and attacks Elaine, but he manages to dodge in time. The guy notices his strange body movements. He is shaking all over, and sparks fly off the sword. Elaine understands that things won't go this way and intercepts his hand, and then throws the sword aside, because it wasn't that difficult for him. The man starts screaming in pain, and the guy just asks if it really is a dark artifact. Elaine realizes that the explosion is the work of a stranger, but then asks him what he can do against him. The man's face shows horror. He doesn't understand what he needs to do, but the guy asks him not to change the subject of the conversation, because it's not that hard to figure out. He comes closer to him and asks if someone sent him. At that moment, the man's head starts to hurt terribly, and at that very moment, he falls to the ground and blood flows from his mouth without stopping. Alan just watches this. Then the stranger says he doesn't want to clean up, and that's not what he wanted at all. And then the guy covers himself with the hilt of his sword, when the deputy head was already aware of everything. Therefore now he clarifies with the man in the cloak whether he understood correctly that with the help of the gift they are being manipulated by their superiors. And then a second later, he plunges the sword into his back, causing him to let out a loud scream. But Alan had no choice but to do it, because it was a forced measure. Because the stranger did not want to talk to him calmly, and he decides to hide his body. But someone watches him from afar, and then comes out to him and asks for forgiveness, saying that there is a man lying in this alley, whom she pursued, and then asks, turning to Alain, how he will explain this to her, or they can resolve everything peacefully. A girl appears before him, most likely a knight. The guy thinks for a moment before giving his answer, and then says that this citizen attacked him for no apparent reason. But the girl, having examined the corpse more closely, asks if it is not his sword sticking out of his back. Alain, without thinking twice, takes out his sword, and the girl looks at the corpse again and realizes that there is not a single scratch on it. She says she understands what's going on and changes her question. Then she asks the guy where he got his gift from. Alain is surprised by her questions because he did not use his gift, and then asks her how she found out about it. The girl tells him that her gift is special, and it allows her to see traces of the use of the gift by others. Now the guy understood everything, and yet he does not believe these words and asks to put his jokes aside. The stranger is not surprised that the deputy thinks of this as a joke and does not believe him, but the girl continues her questioning and asks if the guy knows about dark forces. Alan says that he naturally knows about dark magic. The girl notes that, like a gift, black magic leaves no traces, and the use of black magic is very different from the gift. The guy understands that he is suspected, but still says that even if this is so, he did not use black magic, and asks if she will believe him. The girl says that if he does not find some way to prove it, then no. and she asks him for forgiveness in advance if he did not use black magic. But in any case, she, as the protector of this city and the entire country, cannot let him go so easily. Alan understands that this is a rather complicated situation, and if he gets rid of it now, it will lead to the resumption of the conflict between the countries. He also cannot leave the city without protection in case of his defeat, and even if he escapes, no one will be able to help him. And yet he doesn't know what he should do or how he should act. Then, there's a bang behind the girl. She turns around to see what is going on, but realizing that there is nothing there, she turns back and notices that Elena has disappeared without a trace, and she is now alone in the gateway with the man's corpse. But then the guy ran away again, and she didn't even notice. Having decided to examine the body more closely, there really were no traces of it, as he usually does. And yet, she understands that Alan doesn't have the aura of a magical monster or anything like that. And then she declares that no one should know about this incident. After the appearance of White Noise, Elaine and Melina come out from there. Now they are both standing in the gateway. But if he thinks about it, isn't it really like pretending when she pretends not to know? The guy says that she helped him a lot, but still doesn't understand what she's doing here. Melina explains to him that Noelle and Liz told her that if it was him, he would definitely find himself in trouble. Alan just laughs tiredly, realizing that it's not such a lie. Then someone shouts his name, clearly not in a friendly tone. It was Henrietta. She appeared literally out of nowhere, starting to scold the guy, saying that she warned him how he had already gotten himself into some kind of trouble. And the guy thought that she had already gone somewhere. But the girl doesn't finish and says that he was immediately involved in something. That's why he's here. He has nothing to say in his defense, so he stands motionless and silent, like a fish. Henrietta says that she is indeed problematic. Elaine does not fully understand who she is talking about. Isn't that the night woman she's talking about? The guy says that she really didn't look like a regular patrolman and maybe they should go back to the kingdom once. Henrietta sighs heavily and says that she understands perfectly well that she can't do anything about it. But his understanding of this whole situation is killing her inside. Alan does not understand what is being discussed. The girl explains to him that even if he wants to return, it seems to her that the road to the kingdom has been blocked for a long time. The guy doesn't understand how this is possible, because blocking the road to a foreign country is the same as challenging it. Henrietta says that they are capable of anything, and that woman is part of the homeland of the Black Wolf, which has political independence. Although they can do whatever they want, they still remain a convenient pawn for the Empire, which bears no responsibility for them. With the gift, his future will definitely change, and he suggests to the deputy that if the gift that was given to him is not the one, then some will be very disappointed that the blessing ceremony did not give them the desired gift. Besides, if they provoke a war between the Empire and the Kingdom, the Empire will be all for it. It's tense as always, and the situation is not the best right now, and there are things the Kingdom is better off not knowing. The boy ponders what the girl said and what these things are that the Kingdom is better off not knowing about. Elaine, after thinking for a while, says that in any case, they will not be able to return to the kingdom for some time. He then asks Henrietta if she's going to do anything about it. The girl falls for his impudence and says that this is exactly what she wanted to offer them. That is, her help. And if things continue like this, they will definitely be caught, so she is ready to hide them for a while. And they are very lucky that Henrietta's mansion is quite far from this city. After some time, the five of them are riding in a carriage heading to Henrietta's estate. Noelle says that who would have thought that his and Lisa's premonitions would turn out to be true. Still, she's glad that Elaine is okay. But the guy says that in the end, they had to disturb Henrietta. Then Liz asks, what about Henrietta's family? Don't they mind having 4 more strangers in their estate? Elaine explains to them that her parents have long been dead, so it won't be a problem. They died in an accident a long time ago, and temporarily her uncle's family took on the duties of guardians. Here Liz starts to reason in her head, and Elaine suggests that maybe they were killed. But Henrietta didn't let them finish, and at first couldn't find the right words for a long time. But then she explained to everyone that they still had the status of marquises, and a lot had happened to them, so it wasn't surprising. Then she abruptly changes the subject, saying that they are almost at the estate, and that there is only a little bit left. The rest of the way they rode in silence, and now they are already inside the estate. They are met by a servant. Initially, he came to meet the young lady and greeted only her, but then he noticed the rest of the guys. Henrietta tells him that although they are her guests, she asks him to treat them appropriately. Liz, peeking out from behind Alan, asks for forgiveness for the intrusion. These words made the deputy think, and it was true that even being in the elite of the knightly order, but if he had missed the gift, he would not have become a knight at all. Initially, he wanted to work in a bakery, take over the family business, become a delivery man. Everyone talks so well about it, but still, something bothers him. As soon as the guy took a closer look at the butler, he immediately recognized him, deciding to ask a clarifying question, whether he was Cyrus. Then the servant decided to ask in response, whether it was not Mr. Elaine who was now in front of him. Ola recognize each other, and the mistress of this estate asks if they really know each other. The guy explains to her that in some way they have known each other since his birth. And in general, Cyrus initially worked as a butler for them, but as soon as he left the house, he was immediately fired. The butler says, turning to Monsieur Alain, that he is incredibly glad to meet him again. The guy says that he is also that everything is fine with him. Henrietta says that it was Henrietta who brought Cyrus here. Or, to be more precise, not only him. Then the butler says that now he understands why he couldn't find him. Henrietta says that she knew about his situation. And Henrietta was thrown into this mansion, and she just needed a servant, so everything turned out so well for her. Sitting at the table, Henrietta continues her conversation and says that at the moment, only Henrietta lives in this mansion, so she asks them to make themselves at home. And Noel, sitting on the poof with Milena a little away from the others, admires how soft it is. And yet, Henrietta could not resist and said that Aline had brought some truly incredible people with him. She describes Liz as a former princess who became a duke. She describes Melina as an Amazon with strange powers. As soon as it is Noel's turn, the girl can't stand it any longer, and says to herself that she is the most ordinary wandering elf blacksmith. But Henrietta didn't mean it that way and still decides to drop the subject, which surprises Noel quite a bit. Then the girl asks the guys, asking them to tell it like it is, whether something is really happening in this country. Alan says that everything is really like that and there are too many guards there, and on top of that, the borders are also closed. The deputy asks the stranger, so what if they are being manipulated with the gift? The man in the cloak does not understand what the deputy is saying and whether he is really in his right mind, but he continues and says that they are knights. And so, what if the stranger's words turn out to be true? They will continue to be the shield and loyal servants of this country. On his way, he met a dangerous man and an elite female knight. The city is quite dangerous because of the Order of the Black Wolf, and all because it is not as simple as it seems at first glance. Henrietta just listens silently and analyzes everything the guy said, and then doesn't know where to start telling them. And yet he says that the current situation in the Empire is quite difficult, and in the end, he tells them that the Emperor has died. Horror was frozen on the face of everyone present, but Alan was the only one who was not shocked by this news. Liz, after a moment of silence, decided to say that now everything became clear to her. The death of the generals and archbishops and the ensuing unrest in their country was a perfect opportunity for the Empire to invade. Her own goal was to find out why there were no traces of crimes, and that means one thing, that there was a reason why they couldn't see each other. Henrietta says that the girl is absolutely right in her judgments, and then continues and tells everyone that a year has passed since the Emperor's murder. Alam begins to think to himself that since a year has passed since the murder, now everything falls into place. It was at that time that he was disinherited, and at the same time they tried to kill Liz and the others. Then the guy starts to reason out loud and says that an explosion in the city, a suspicious person. Doesn't this all mean that a demon is at work in the Empire? Here Henrietta says that she is not trying to persuade them to her side and force them to cooperate with her. She's just trying to give them an idea of what's going on, and she's not here to get him into trouble. Elaine says that, apart from the Empire, since they have taken him in, he sees no reason to refuse. Noel doesn't understand what this demon actually needs. Henrietta explains to her that, to put it simply, he is a rebel against the world, and it creates the impression that he doesn't like the way he is built, so he does everything in defiance. Still, she says she didn't want the boys to get involved because of the demon, But Alain interrupts her and says that he just remembered that on the way here to the Empire, they encountered sand wolves. Henrietta asks in surprise how these are sand wolves, and then, after thinking for a bit, suggests that this is exactly what the Order of the Black Wolf does. And this is their pride. They are not children, after all. In order for the country to be right, it is using them right now. Lee wonders if they could have used sandwolves, and then says that it would be bad if someone got hurt on the road. Noel says that if it weren't for Alain, they would all be dead long ago. Henrietta explains to them that the Order of the Black Wolf is mostly criminals sentenced to death. They are only released when they are on duty, which means they are willing to do anything to get what they want. The guy thinks about it for a long time and finally says that it's quite difficult. Henrietta suddenly stops speaking and freezes, looking at the guy. Alain does not understand what is going on. The girl explains to him that the whole thing is that he started laughing. Then she suddenly gets up and says that she should go to her room, and she'll be right back after she's worked a little bit. And she tells the boys that they can relax a little bit. Liz, with a smile on her face, says that they will see each other later, and Noelle only thanks Henrietta for her hospitality. On the way to her room, the girl reflects that she always thought that Alain was a man with a strong, unbreakable heart, who deserved power and the role of a hero. But, as it turned out, this was not the case at all, and he always wanted to help only those in need. Over time, people began to respect the great and powerful Alain. But still, this fear and their heartless words caused him deep pain. It was most convenient for her to think that Henrietta couldn't even make him smile. But still, she is happy to see them all happy and cheerful. But she is a little upset that it was not Henrietta who made him smile and laugh like that. And then he starts his speech, saying that he is Brad Westfelt, from the Westfelt Duke family, and the guy is 100% sure that people have heard of him. But that's not why the townspeople are unhappy. One of the knights adds to his words and says that if they want to become better, then let them become better. Then only if they can defeat them. Not a ring days later, Alain sits with a mug of tea and says he doesn't blame Noelle, who is sitting next to him. And the best solution for them now would be silence for both of them. Although the girl understands this, she still feels awkward. Some time ago, Noelle says she was going to visit the workshops of every dwarf in the Empire. Liz tries to calm her down, but all her attempts are in vain. Then Henrietta asks, if she wants to go so much, then why not? Noelle wonders if this is really possible. Henrietta explains that they are far from Loris and there are a lot of elves in the throat. Noel says that she understood everything and is surprised because she had never seen elves in real life before. Henrietta says that there are several workshops here, and she will definitely show them to her. This news cannot but please the girl. Sometime later, Noelle and Milena are already standing on the street, and their bodies are covered with capes. Noelle is absolutely glowing with happiness, and is very happy about this walk, and then thanks Milena for coming. And she says with confidence that if something happens, she will protect Noelle. The elves are counting on her. And yet, the girl notes that, despite everything, there are a lot of elves here, and she is very surprised by this. The deputy says that even if the gods decided what to do for them, they themselves chose who they should be, and this is the truth. And then she stops abruptly, because it seems to her that one of the elves is watching her. She turns in the other direction, as if leaving the elf who was following her, and asks Milena to follow her. Assuming the workshop is in the direction they are currently headed, the Amazon says she understands and follows her, and they finally found the workshop, and now a satisfied Noelle is already looking at all the possible swords. Sometime later, the girls have already returned from their walk, and Noelle shares his impressions, saying that it was a lot of fun. And the skill of the gnomes is simply amazing. Liz, sitting on a chair with a cup of tea, says that she is very happy for the girl. But still, the elf was a little tired of the city elves looking at her, and she didn't know what it was. Liz asks if they have seen her, but Noelle tells her that just in case, she used Milena's magic to disappear. Liz says she doesn't think they expected to see a strange elf. Elaine asks Noelle if she really thinks they could have followed them to this town. Henrietta says it's because she is who she is. But Noelle doesn't understand what she is trying to tell her. Henrietta explains to her that there is an elven forest near this city. But Liz is surprised and asks if the girl really wants to tell them this. But Henrietta goes on to say that she is sure that there are many places where elves live that have gone unaccounted for. And if they get lost, the memory will be erased and they will not be able to find them due to lack of information. so she thought that Noelle would definitely want to go there. But the girl wonders why she would do that. At this statement, the stranger only starts laughing loudly, calling the entire knightly squad fools who do not understand their actions. He tells them that his primary task was simply to stop them, but he changed his mind. And now he will kill them as neatly as possible and tell the corpses about his greatness. The deputy tells him to shut up, because this will never happen. But Henrietta, in turn, is sure that she will be welcome. She does not understand how they can be happy to see her, because she has been a wandering elf all her life, and she wonders if they will definitely accept her. And Liz is already imagining in her head how she's going to the elven forest, because she really wanted to get there. But even if she wants it so much, how can she get there? Henrietta says that it is actually quite easy to get to the elven forest, and there are exits everywhere. But from the very beginning, they themselves had to want to get there. And crossing her arms in the castle, she continues and says that, if the elves agree, then an entrance will appear, and a door painted with flower petals appears in front of her. Henrietta turns to face the children and says that they can go into the elven forest, and he says that they will obey him when they leave for another world. The man in the cloak is surprised that they do not lose hope even in such a difficult moment. People may treat it like a treasure, but unfortunately, in his opinion, that's pretty stupid, and he wishes them death, and after that a fog appears and then he disappears without a trace, leaving no traces behind. The deputy realizes that he has disappeared and also notices that they are being attacked and informs his comrades about it. But one of them is the least lucky and is attacked, causing him to lose consciousness. The deputy understands that at this rate, they will simply be smashed to smithereens and they will not be able to resist any longer. And yet, he tries to fight back against his opponents, but they manage to hurt and injure him. And at that moment, someone wants to tell him something. But the deputy reminds them not to get distracted and to concentrate on the fight. And again there is smoke, and from it appears the same stranger in a cloak. But he asks them to listen carefully again to what he is going to tell them. He says that here it is, just like a knightly squad can even do something with such wounds, and it is not the power of the gift. Then he asks if they really understand what he is talking about. But the deputy, raising his sword up, says, "Shut him up," because he does not intend to give in so easily, especially to him. The stranger says that this is too pitiful an answer, and that they are real fools to be so eager to part with life. But the deputy tries not to react to this in any way and repeats again so that he shuts up, because this is what it means to be a knight. This is their duty. From behind, someone's voice is heard saying that it is true that this fact cannot be denied, and that he is one of them. And apparently those people are right who say that knights do not shine with intelligence. The pupils of the deputy dilate as soon as he sees Madame Beatrice in front of him. The deputy head breathes a sigh of relief when he sees the lady in front of him. He greets her, wishing her good health, and yet does not think that these words are appropriate now, because they could not cope with this stranger in a cloak. And he is so ashamed that he could not cope with everything himself. But Beatrice tells him that she managed to come to this place only thanks to him, or to be more precise, thanks to his magical weapon, and in the end she praises him because it was well thought out. And then, without ceremony, the girl strikes the stranger, causing him to bleed from the wound. The man in the cloak does not understand how this woman ended up in front of him, because just recently the deputy was in front. Brad tells him that the man he is pointing at is an alchemist hired by their house, Westfeld. Beatrice answers him that it is for this very reason that there is a strong comrade here, and he is standing at a distance, which means he'll borrow a little power. The stranger realizes that the situation is getting more serious, so he feels he needs to leave as soon as possible before it is too late. But that same strong comrade, finding himself very close to what was happening, says, addressing the man in the cloak, that he has nowhere left to run. The girl with white hair tied in ponytails, standing in front of the stranger, who is also a strong comrade, begins to use her power and everything around her is covered in smoke. And then she and Beatrice simultaneously attack the stranger, leaving him no chance to escape. From such a blow, the man is on the floor, breathing heavily and coughing, not finding the strength to get to his feet. Beatrice is the princess's personal knight, and the deputy wants the real power to be exactly like hers. He looks the girl intently in the eyes. She notices his gaze on herself. Then the deputy calls out to her, calling her Mrs. Beatrice, and she gives him her hand so that he can stand up. At the moment when their hands touch, the man says that he would like to hear many things, But now he can only thank her. Meanwhile, the head of the Knight's Order, Craig, and the captain join their swords in a difficult battle. Craig wounded General Kirill, causing him to fall to the ground, his sword flying in the other direction, leaving him unarmed. Initially, the product they created was raw, but now they are creating something called a magical life form. All the people start whispering and do not understand how this incomprehensible thing can have a magical life form. Breathing heavily, he tries to rise to his feet, but Craig immediately puts his sword to his throat, not allowing him to move. And then he says, addressing the general, that if he understands the difference in their strength, then it would be better to simply calmly submit to him and not suffer so much now. And then Craig calls him an old fool. But General Kirill, in turn, notes that Craig is definitely hiding something. And if he says that everything is exactly like this, then the owners of powerful gifts are only a hindrance, or to be more precise, they should disappear. Craig tells him that he is quick to act as always, which is not playing into his hands. But if he had been just a little bit dumber, maybe he wouldn't have died in vain. And then, smiling, he shouts out the general's name and asks what he's going to do now. And then Kirill realizes what's going on and asks Craig what he did with the archbishop. But the man asks, turning to the general, if he says, will anything change? And in the end, in his case, it is unclear whether he will receive an answer. The general agrees with him and says that he must still stop him, saying that his deceased friend, in place of Kirill, wants to ask him as a friend not to do this and leave Shu. With the sword held to his throat, answers for Craig himself, but then all his attention is drawn to the man who greeted them. This man stands with a sword in his bosom and addresses General Kirill as if he were an uncle captain, saying that he has apparently been completely defeated. After all, he sees such a pitiful picture before his eyes. All this time, the girl was talking to them, standing in the distance and watching their brutal fight. She continues, but now all her attention is focused on Craig, and she asks if he could slow down a little. Because after all, she wanted to defeat the guy herself. And Craig, in turn, stands in complete bewilderment and does not understand why the hero is in such a place. Without thinking twice, the guy stretches out his hand, and a dark creature appears behind him. Brad asks the people to look at it carefully. He explains to them that it is a magical life form he made, something like a golem. After all, she should have been dead for a long time. These words make the girl furious. She does not understand by whose orders she should be dead, although she does not deny that she had previously thought that she would die. She notes to herself that they know quite a lot of information, which cannot help but worry her. Craig asks if she really abandoned the child and saved herself, and indeed, even if she is called a hero, in the end she is just a puppet of the gods, and there is nothing surprising in this. But the girl only asks them not to decide everything for her, and then asks who really abandoned the child here, because she would never do that. But she continues and says that since he knows about this, he concludes that Craig is their comrade, as she assumed. But the man asks, even if this is so, what does she want to tell him with this? The girl was only angered by these words, and she said that she would smash his head after everything he said. She asks the general for forgiveness for interrupting him, but he tells her that she herself sees the state he is in, so there is no point in asking him for forgiveness. Besides, he could use some help in the form of another sword. But he quickly forgets about this thought and says that it's okay, and in a sense, he will even keep his powers, because they will be useful to him later. And Craig, listening to their conversation, says that he will still be able to destroy the puppet of the gods with these very hands. The girl answers him that she is tired of him with his puppet, and who else is being controlled here anyway? After all, this power was simply given to her, but she remained herself, and if no one has any objections, she doesn't care whether it's God or not. She will crush him, no matter what. General Kirill thinks that's exactly it, even with God's will or without it. People can't believe what he just said, and are surprised at how huge this golem is. But Brad asks everyone present to calm down, because the magical life form he created is completely safe. But in the eyes of civilians, he is still dangerous. Ultimately, it's up to them to decide what to do. They can blame God for everything that happened, or they can just run away. The general gathers all his last strength to stand up, leaning on his sword, and understands that if he does not stop Craig, it could end badly for everyone. And first of all, for himself. But before Carol can do anything, Craig declares that he will kill them all and prove that he was right about everything. To this, the girl only openly laughs in his face and says that now is the time when she can stand out and show her skills. Everyone unsheathed their swords and stood in a combat readiness pose, because each of them is ready to take a blow and face danger. Brad invites everyone present to unite and use all their power so that the world, which is in trouble, can be saved. And he asks to leave the defense of the people to him, because he's been dealing with this for many years. And suddenly someone interrupts his speech, saying that this is how it means. And the speaker finds it hard to believe. Brad turns to where the sound is coming from, and then a grin appears on his face as soon as he sees the person speaking to him. And then he says that they haven't seen each other for a long time and calls him defective. He doesn't understand what this man is doing here. And then he asks how it is that he doesn't believe in them and how to understand this at all. And then he clarifies that only he can extend this magician's life. Brad answers him and says that he understood everything correctly and the method of preparing the medicine is very secret. Therefore, it is not known to anyone